My eldest son, whom I raised single-handedly, is getting married. His fiancée is strikingly beautiful like a model, yet it became clear that beauty was her only asset when she callously told me, "You're a dropout and a stranger, so don't come." To add insult to injury, I was deceived about the wedding venue. Over time, she maintained a contemptuous attitude towards me due to my lack of formal education. She even portrayed me as the unreasonable mother who supposedly canceled their wedding at the last minute. It was unforgivable. While they were away on their honeymoon, I, Linda, soon to be 57, reminisced about my life. My husband had passed away from cancer the year our second son was born, leaving me overwhelmed with 2 young children. As the new year rolled in, I found solace only in working tirelessly day and night. My eldest son, Paul, stepped up admirably, caring for his younger brother Thomas, even as a little boy. I did what I could for my boys, and Paul has grown into a remarkable adult. It was a challenge when he decided to enter the workforce straight out of high school. I fondly recall the effort it took to persuade him to pursue college, a distant memory now. After graduating, he secured a position at a prominent trading company and began forging a promising path. Apparently, Paul has a girlfriend whom he plans to marry someday. He expressed his desire to introduce her to me, which was somewhat unexpected given his intense focus on his career. I had imagined he would marry much later, but I genuinely felt joy knowing he wanted to start his own family soon. Having not been the most attentive mother, I worried whether he would value starting a family. However, all my concerns dissolved as Paul's wedding approached. I eagerly anticipated meeting his partner and eagerly awaited the day of their introduction. The woman who entered was slender and breathtakingly beautiful, momentarily leaving me speechless. I wondered where Paul had encountered such a beauty. When Paul introduced her, I was surprised to learn she was an actual model. He had met Sarah through his advertising work at the trading company. Sarah, 24 years old, appeared vivacious and made a favorable initial impression, though something nagged at me. She glanced around our home without hesitation, almost assessing her future in-law's residence, which unsettled me. Moreover, her refusal to even touch the coffee I offered didn't sit right with me. When Paul stepped away to take a work call, Sarah and I found ourselves alone for the first time. It was an awkward moment, and we struggled to initiate a conversation. "You'll soon be my daughter when you marry Paul, so feel free to talk about anything." I attempted to break the ice. To my surprise, Sarah looked taken aback by my words and then uttered something astonishing. "No need. I wouldn't seek advice from someone who didn't finish school," she said with a polite smile, leaving me momentarily stunned. Her smile seemed sincere as she continued, "Yes, I did leave school early, but I had my reasons. My father passed away when I was in middle school, leaving me, my younger brother, and sister with our mother. She worked tirelessly to support us, but there were limitations. I made the decision to start working right after middle school, against my mother's desperate pleas for me to at least finish high school. I have no regrets about that decision even now." I was taken aback and completely unprepared for her condescending attitude towards my education. It caught me completely off guard. "Well, I have a higher education than you, so what would I gain from consulting someone beneath me?" she remarked with a laugh, leaving me speechless. Now, the prospect of her becoming my daughter-in-law was starting to give me a headache. "Looks like you two were getting along well while I was on the call," Paul said upon his return, cheerfully breaking the tension. Sarah responded with a graceful smile, seemingly brushing off the earlier incident. "She's a delightful mother. I'm sure we'll get along just fine," she remarked. Hearing that, I almost choked on my coffee. Sensing my distress, Sarah asked with a laugh, though her eyes betrayed a lack of warmth. I sighed quietly, apprehensive about what the future held. My initial encounter with Paul's future wife, Sarah, was less than ideal. She repeatedly belittled me for dropping out of school, albeit seemingly without malice. Despite her unintended hurtful remarks, I struggled with the idea of her becoming a part of our family. Nevertheless, because she was Paul's choice, I attempted to accept her. After that first meeting, Sarah never visited our home again. I inquired with Paul about their wedding plans, and he assured me everything was proceeding as planned. He had already met her well-educated parents, both graduates of prestigious universities. They had first met during a seminar at the university where Paul himself had graduated from, and Sarah's parents had grown quite fond of him. When I asked Paul about arranging a meeting between both families, he awkwardly replied, "I'm good for now," leaving me puzzled about what he meant. It appeared that the wedding plans were well underway. Paul, occupied with his job, had delegated all arrangements to Sarah. Since Paul seemed satisfied, I find it difficult to intervene. At least he's handled meeting her parents with proper etiquette. Despite my reservations, I've chosen to observe quietly. More than 6 months after our initial meeting, Sarah reached out to discuss the wedding. Invitations had already been dispatched to various guests. They'd chosen a luxurious hotel venue, indicating a substantial gathering of over 100 guests. It's shaping up to be quite a lavish affair, a rarity these days. It sounds like you're planning quite a grand wedding, I remarked. Yes, my father owns a company, so through various connections, the guest list expanded, she explained. As I listened to Sarah, I started to have concerns about the planning on the groom's side. Paul has left everything to Sarah. I'm worried if they've considered the seating arrangements. I know Paul has left everything to you, but could you let me know who's coming from his side? I wouldn't want to be rude by not recognizing someone, I asked. Sarah responded with a hint of irritation. Sure, she said curtly. Everything's perfectly arranged, so there's no need to worry, she added, her tone coming across as somewhat condescending. I felt a surge of irritation, but I held back from raising my voice to a younger woman. The wedding was just a month away, and I emphasized the importance of having the date and time confirmed repeatedly. I asked Sarah for an invitation, but she explained they were only printing the necessary minimum. She didn't send one. We're trying to keep costs down, she said, leaving me unable to press further. I made sure to mark the date on my calendar so as not to forget. Paul had moved to a new house the previous week. The move seemed sudden, and I was left bewildered as I watched the movers take away his belongings. Paul, apparently unaware of the exact moving day, returned that evening to find his things gone. He chuckled it off, attributing it to Sarah's planning, and headed to his new home. I realized I didn't even know his new address. I assumed he would reach out to me, but so far, I haven't heard anything. On the wedding day, I dressed up and made my way to the hotel. Despite the celebratory atmosphere, I had some unresolved feelings toward Sarah. I felt like I wasn't being respected as the mother of the groom. As I entered the hotel lobby, guests, presumably from the bride's side, were gathering. I didn't recognize anyone, confirming they were likely Sarah's relatives. Making my way to the groom's waiting room, I encountered a scene that left me utterly stunned. Sitting together were a bride and groom surrounded by elegantly dressed men and women. Assuming these were Sarah's parents, I was taken aback. However, I soon realized they weren't Paul and Sarah at all, but complete strangers. They looked at me with confusion, understandably seeing me as an unexpected intruder in their private moment. Sorry, I must have walked into the wrong room, I muttered, feeling my face flush with embarrassment as I hurriedly exited. It was indeed another wedding. A sinking feeling prompted me to approach the hotel's bridal staff. They confirmed there was no reservation for Paul's wedding. Sarah had deceived me about the date and time, though I was certain today was supposed to be the wedding day. Regrettably, I have failed to confirm the location with Paul in time. Somewhere at this moment, Paul and Sarah were surely having their wedding. It dawned on me that Sarah had orchestrated this to ensure I wouldn't attend. I quickly dialed Sarah's number. She picked up immediately. What is the meaning of this? I demanded, my voice tinged with frustration. Sarah let out a heavy sigh. How inappropriate to disrupt such an important day, she scolded. She sounded alone. There was no one else around her. Sarah, you're the one being unreasonable. Why would you lie? I began, but she cut me off sharply. People who didn't finish school are strangers here, so leave, she declared coldly. Her words hit me like a blow. I seethed, thinking about the lengths she had gone to humiliate me. Paul, I understand, I said firmly. But it was too late to salvage the situation and make it to the wedding. My main worry was how Paul must have felt in my absence. In the end, I couldn't attend and returned home. The next day, I was awakened by a call from Thomas, who works overseas and had regretfully informed us he couldn't make it back for Paul's wedding. Paul reached out to me, revealing that he hadn't shown up at the wedding either. He explained, it seems Sarah had contacted Thomas, and somehow the story got twisted into me opposing Sarah and canceling the wedding at the last minute. Paul was seeking advice from Thomas on how to handle the situation. Sarah's manipulation was nothing short of remarkable. I explained the truth to Thomas, recounting how Sarah had deceived me with false information, preventing my attendance at the wedding. Initially, Thomas seemed skeptical, perhaps thinking I was making excuses. However, as I described Sarah's dismissive behavior during her initial visit, he began to believe me. Does Paul know about this? he inquired. He probably thinks I canceled at the last minute, I replied, feeling tears of frustration welling up. You won't let this slide, will you? Thomas sought to reassure me. No, I affirmed. This was no time for tears. I was determined to set things right with Paul, and my frustration soon gave way to resolve. Unable to reach Paul, who was likely on his honeymoon, I decided to confront Sarah's parents directly. I visited their home, where they greeted me with evident suspicion. As we sat down to talk, it became apparent they believed I had opposed the marriage and abruptly canceled at the last minute. I started by addressing this misunderstanding head-on. I wasn't certain they would trust my explanation, but I felt compelled to lay out the truth. Initially, they remained skeptical. However, as a last resort, I revealed my trump card, a recorded conversation with Sarah. It felt drastic, but I had no other choice. With a deep breath, I retrieved my phone and played the recorded conversation. The harsh words Sarah spoke echoed through the phone. I understand why you'd want to support Sarah. I'm a mother too, but please understand how painful it is to be excluded from my own son's wedding, I pleaded. Sarah's parents bowed their heads in silence, offering no apology. It dawned on me then. They had molded Sarah into the person she was, including her disdain for my lack of formal education. In that tense silence, I slid my business card across the table. Sarah's father's eyes widened as he examined it, then looked back at me. I'll do whatever it takes, I vowed. Paul returned a week later from his honeymoon, during which I hadn't heard from him. I feared Sarah might have influenced him, but it turned out to be an unnecessary worry. As I heard the front door open, I stepped out of the living room to find Paul walking in. Upon seeing me, he hurried over to apologize. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't realize what was happening. Soon after the newlyweds returned from their honeymoon to their new home, Sarah's parents paid them a visit. Without time to settle in, Sarah found herself confronted by her father, Joseph. What's going on? Paul, caught off guard, was stunned as Joseph burst in, shouting at Sarah. Sarah hesitated briefly under her father's anger, but her resolve quickly kicked in, leading to a heated exchange between father and daughter. Your actions are tarnishing our reputation, he thundered, tossing my business card at Sarah. She picked it up, her face draining of color as she read my title. Unknown to Sarah, I held the position of president at one of her father's crucial business clients. Despite leaving school early, I worked diligently and earned respect, rising to this prestigious role. Additionally, her father's company acted as a subcontractor for mine. Just 3 days earlier, I had terminated all contracts with his small parts distribution business, which relied heavily on our company for over 80% of its orders. It was understandable that he was upset. You need to apologize to Linda immediately, he insisted. Sarah hesitated, clearly confused. I don't see why I should apologize to someone like her, she retorted stubbornly. It was then that Paul began to grasp the truth. Reflecting on Sarah's behavior, he started to notice several inconsistencies. He apologized to me for believing Sarah's fabricated story about my absence on the wedding day. Mom, I forgot. I should never have doubted you. I'm truly sorry. It's all right, as long as you understand. But I won't reverse my decision regarding the company. I can't continue business with someone who discriminates based on education, I asserted. Paul nodded in agreement. Then he declared, the marriage is over. The scandalous news of a divorce right after their honeymoon spread rapidly. Paul apologized to the guests and reimbursed the gifts from his side at his own expense. Allegedly, there was no response from Sarah's guests. When her guests requested reimbursements, she reportedly caused a scene. The divorce was a difficult process, eventually involving lawyers. The recorded evidence I provided played a crucial role in the proceedings. Paul joked that divorcing was harder than getting married and mentioned that Sarah's father's company was now facing bankruptcy, despite attempting to return to modeling. Sarah found her reputation too tarnished for any agency to hire her. Recently, she's been spotted intoxicated, still harboring resentment towards me. The dropout old lady. There's been no sign of remorse from her. Perhaps further setbacks might prompt some introspection. Back at home, Hall suggested renovating our old house. It seems he's in no rush to remarry. I'll focus on my career, just like you, Mom, he said, bringing me joy. I felt reassured that I have fulfilled both parental roles effectively. Just be more cautious in your choice of partner next time, was my only advice. Paul nodded, looking somewhat sheepish.
It became apparent that Charles's employee, Junior, had been openly undermining his leadership. going so far as to dismiss Charles as a competent boss altogether. Charles overheard these disparaging remarks, which led to a tense confrontation between the two. In hindsight, Charles should have realized the importance of fostering a stronger relationship with his team. On the other hand, I received an offer to relocate to our company's overseas headquarters. Initially, I declined, weighed down by the ongoing issues and wanting to be supportive of Charles during his turbulent time. However, after much thought, I accepted the position and am now preparing for the move. My father, understandably concerned, has been adjusting to the idea, and we've started practicing video calls to stay connected once I leave. This new role has been a lifelong dream of mine, and I'm eager to pour my energy into this exciting opportunity. As for Charles, he rarely contributed to household chores, yet this never seemed to bother Angela. When they went out, Charles typically took the lead, allowing Angela to relax and enjoy herself without stress. Their relationship seemed balanced, or at least it appeared that way. Everything shifted when Angela's mother suddenly passed away. Angela was at work when her father called to inform her that her mother's condition had taken a sharp turn for the worse, and she had collapsed. Rushing to the hospital, Angela barely had time to say her goodbyes. She decided to stay with her father to help manage the funeral arrangements. When she informed Charles, he claimed he couldn't leave work on such short notice. As a result, he missed the wake and only arrived in time for the funeral. Unprepared for the occasion, Charles hadn't even dressed appropriately, and I found myself in a frantic scramble to find something suitable for him to wear. Despite my efforts, he made no effort to hide his irritation, blaming me for not having prepared his clothes in advance. The heavy emotions surrounding the funeral, along with the responsibilities that came with it, made Charles's complaints even harder to bear. I eventually decided to ignore them, hoping to avoid a confrontation, but this only seemed to worsen his mood. Since that day, our marriage has become increasingly strained, with arguments becoming more frequent. Disagreements aren't uncommon after 4 years of marriage, but Charles's behavior has grown more combative. He constantly insists on making decisions and dictating what I should do, and it's been draining. I've tried to push back a few times, but his unfamiliarity with the simplest things in our home has turned minor tasks into drawn-out frustrations, accompanied by his never-ending grumbling. As time went on, I realized it was often easier to handle things on my own. Even though Charles continues to make demands, I haven't always followed his instructions, opting instead to take care of tasks independently to keep my life running smoothly. Recently, I brought up the upcoming gathering to mark the first anniversary of my mother's passing. When I reminded Charles, his response was indifferent at best. He complained about an important meeting scheduled on the same day, questioning how he could possibly attend the memorial. His excuse was that he couldn't delegate his work, especially since his recent promotion, which he never missed a chance to flaunt to his junior staff. I was barely able to contain my frustration as I tried to convey how important the memorial was to me. It was painfully clear that he prioritized his new title and responsibilities, often leaving me to manage everything on my own. No matter how much I urged him to focus on our family's needs, his work always seemed to come first. Later that evening, when I finally arrived home from work, I found Charles sprawled on the couch, a beer in hand. "Sorry, I'm late. Had to stay for overtime," I explained, already sensing his annoyance that dinner had been delayed. His response was sharp. "I've been waiting here for an hour." While it had only been an hour, and knowing that cooking wasn't his strong suit, it baffled me that he hadn't thought to get something to eat in the meantime. I had told him when I'd be home. After all, trying to keep my irritation in check, I handed him a takeout box and said, "I thought cooking would take too long tonight, so I grabbed this on the way home." Charles's reaction was swift and cutting, slamming his beer glass onto the table. "Takeout again? You're really slacking off lately, aren't you?" His words stung, especially considering it had been nearly 3 weeks since we last ordered takeout. "Yes, I had been busy and couldn't cook every night, but I always ensured we had balanced meals and didn't rely on processed food. His uncalled-for critique left me debating whether I should even respond. Sensing my silence as an admission of guilt, Charles pressed on, adding insult to injury. Can't argue when it's true. Huh? You should start doing your chores properly. You've been coming home late, claiming overtime, maybe you're just out cheating. His accusation ignited the resentment simmering inside me. If you know I'm working late, the least you could do is make dinner. I shot back. You don't even have to cook. Picking up takeout isn't that hard. I always tell you when I'll be home, and despite my workload, I manage all the household chores. There's no need for that attitude. His response was a sharp glare, followed by a low blow. You're 4 years older. Remember? I could have married a younger woman, but I chose you. He spoke as though I should be grateful, like his choice of me was a favor I didn't deserve. You should be thankful and listen to me. No one else would want you. His words were meant to belittle me, but instead, they revealed just how broken our communication and respect for each other had become. So, if I left, you'd be in trouble, right? My anger boiled over. If you wanted a younger woman, you should have married one before we got together. I asked you if you were fine with my age, and you said yes. That's why we're married. But trust me, I can manage just fine without you. Charles responded with a mocking laugh. Fine, then let's get a divorce, he said, grabbing his beer and the takeout before storming off to his room. We had fought plenty of times before, but this argument felt different, like we had crossed a line. I was tired of his constant disrespect. I sat down with my takeout, trying to calm myself, hoping maybe he was just hungry and irritable, but as I ate, the weight of our conversation hung heavily on me, especially with my mom's death anniversary just around the corner. After some time, I called out to him from outside his door. We need to leave by 7 a.m. tomorrow, so I'll wake you up around 6 o'clock. There was no response, though I was sure he was awake. I went to bed, feeling a mix of exhaustion and unease. The next morning, I woke up early to find that Charles was already gone. The bags I had packed for us were still in the room. He hadn't left for the gathering without me. So, where had he gone? I tried calling his phone, but there was no answer. He ignored my texts too, left with no choice. I left him a voicemail and started getting ready on my own. As I waited for the train at the station, Charles finally picked up. I have a meeting. Can't leave it to my juniors, he said curtly before hanging up. I stood there, staring at my phone, feeling a mix of anger and resignation. I stood there, stunned and bewildered, as the train arrived. With no time to dwell on it, I boarded, struggling with the luggage meant for both of us. When I finally reached my father's house, his anxious eyes met mine as he asked, "Where's Charles?" Seeing the lingering sadness in his eyes since my mother's passing, I didn't want to add to his worries. Forcing a smile, I took a deep breath and replied, "Sorry. He got called into an important meeting. He was supposed to come." Charles's recent promotion made for a convenient excuse, and I reassured my father that his absence was work-related and important. My father nodded understandingly. "I know he's working hard. It's a shame not to see him, but your mother would have understood. Let him know he's always welcome here," he said softly. There was a hint of sadness in his words, but I kept my smile intact throughout the day, refusing to show how much it hurt. The day passed without a word from Charles, and as night settled in, I chose not to reach out either. I decided to stay the night at my father's house and return home the next day. As planned, though it felt almost childish, the thought of making Charles his favorite meal, hamburgers, crossed my mind for when I got home. The following day, I left my father's house and returned home around noon. Before heading out to the grocery store, I wanted to drop off my bags. As I walked into the living room, I immediately noticed Charles's dirty laundry scattered across the floor, a sight I was all too familiar with. With a sigh, I thought, he still hasn't learned how to use the washing machine. I tossed his clothes in with mine, and after a brief moment, headed back to the living room. That's when something caught my eye. Sitting on the table, as if left deliberately in plain view, were divorce papers, already signed by Charles. My heart sank. Was this really how he wanted to communicate that he was serious about ending our marriage? Staring at the papers in disbelief, a storm of emotions surged through me. Grabbing my phone, I hesitated for a second before calling him, unsure if he'd even pick up during his lunch break. To my surprise, he answered almost immediately. "What's the meaning of these divorce papers?" I demanded, my voice a blend of confusion and anger. Charles responded with a cold, mocking laugh. "What's there to question? It's exactly what it looks like. I don't want an older wife who won't do her chores. That's why I want a divorce. If we split, I can find a younger wife. A wife's like a status symbol, right? I can't exactly boast about you." His words hit me like a punch, reducing our years together to nothing more than a transaction, turning what I had believed to be a partnership into something shallow and superficial. Charles continued, his tone indifferent. "It's tough when my team asks about you. It's awkward avoiding the topic." I was speechless. His blunt criticism was stunning, and I found myself unable to respond. "If you don't want a divorce, then start doing your chores properly," he continued, as if this was a reasonable request. "I'll be home as usual tonight, so don't forget to grab some beer. If you disagree, take the divorce papers to court. It's up to you." With that, he hung up, leaving me reeling, my mind spinning with shock and disbelief. Charles probably assumed I'd give in to his demands, thinking that I did the housework because I was afraid of losing him or worried about appearing incompetent. Perhaps he saw himself as the dominant figure in our marriage. Some might think being married to a younger man sounds exciting, but in reality, it was far from glamorous. I had often played up his youth, but if I was honest, Charles was painfully average in looks, personality, and income. There was nothing exceptional about him. Describing him as younger had merely been convenient. When we first got married, the 4-year age gap had seemed more noticeable, but now, in our 30s, it felt trivial. It was exhausting to constantly be labeled the older wife when we were essentially the same age. Fed up with his arrogance and the hollow foundation of our marriage, I grabbed my bag and headed straight to the family court. Submitting those divorce papers felt like lifting a weight off my chest. As I walked out of the courthouse, a sense of relief washed over me. I realized then that I didn't need Charles to feel complete. With the promise of newfound freedom, I felt lighter, as though I had finally stepped out from under a cloud that had long been looming over me. This was the end of our marriage, but the beginning of a life where I could truly live on my own terms. Seizing the opportunity, I decided to take a few days off from work. Fortunately, my boss understood and granted me a week's leave, as work had slowed down. Now that I was officially divorced, it was time to get my life in order. With only a few possessions, the cleaning and packing were straightforward. I stored the larger items in a storage unit, packed the essentials and clothes into my car, and on a whim, decided to visit a hot spring resort. During the off-season, I easily found a budget-friendly hotel and set off, thrilled to start this new chapter of my life. I was savoring the peaceful atmosphere of the hot springs and enjoying the relaxation of my hotel room when my phone rang abruptly. "Angela, didn't I ask you to get beer? Where are you?" It was Charles, sounding puzzled and slightly irritated. It was around the time he usually returned home from work. I couldn't help but chuckle as I answered, "I'm at a hot spring resort." "A hot spring resort? Why? What's going on?" Charles's voice carried a mix of confusion and agitation. "Didn't you say I should file for divorce if I disagreed with you?" I reminded him, picturing his stunned expression, which made me laugh even more. Wait, did you actually file them? His tone shifted from bewildered to frustrated. Yes, I did. You suggested it, Charles. Have you forgotten what you said? I replied, still amused by his reaction. Charles's voice, now tinged with anxiety, showed his disbelief. Wait, are you joking? When you say hot spring resort, do you mean some nearby spa? If so, I'll get dinner. Come home soon. I couldn't help but laugh at his sudden shift to a seemingly considerate tone, as if he was trying to play the caring husband. It took me about an hour and a half to drive here. There's even an outdoor natural hot spring. It's incredibly relaxing. I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. Since you're getting dinner, I've already packed my things, so you won't have to worry about me coming back. Take care of yourself. Charles pleaded for me to return, but I had no intention of going back. You're the one who initiated the divorce. Have you forgotten? It was clear you were using the threat of divorce to control me. I told him firmly. I can manage without you now that you've divorced your older wife. Go ahead and find a younger one if you can. Whether you succeed or not is no longer my concern, I said firmly. Charles fell silent, clearly taken aback by my determination. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. But you should consider moving out of that apartment. Why should I? I responded calmly, though I had already considered this myself. Think about your income. You'll end up broke if you stay there. You can't clean, do laundry, or cook. You'll need housekeeping and dining out, which costs money. It would be a problem if most of your salary goes towards rent, he reasoned. I couldn't help but smile slightly. You thought you were the provider, but my salary is nearly double yours. You never really provided for me, if anything. It was the other way around, I said, cutting to the core of the issue. Also, you were overly confident because of one junior. But did you know I manage multiple juniors and even more beneath them? I usually keep work to myself because you get moody, but I outrank you in both position and salary. You'd think you would have noticed after living together. It seemed like Charles was just now realizing this, possibly because he had kept his ego intact by looking down on me. Now that his delusion was shattered, he must have felt defeated. I had struck a blow to his pride, a kind of retribution for all these years. The reason I had handled household chores without complaint, despite his domineering attitude, was partly because he was younger and I had given him some leeway, and partly because it was too much trouble to ask him for anything. It's not like I needed you to stay with me. I was just managing your needs along with my own. So when you said, do the chores, or we divorce, of course, I chose divorce. We're strangers now. Goodbye, I said firmly before ending the call. Feeling a sense of liberation, I enjoyed a delicious meal at the hotel afterward. Charles, evidently still clinging to the idea of reconciliation, attempted to reach out again, but I was already relishing the newfound freedom and independence in my life. When he called once more, I greeted him with a knowing smile. Remember, I'm older than you. I'm sure you wouldn't want me back. It seemed that Charles's search for companionship with younger women had not been successful. Eventually, he realized his situation was not favorable and decided to move out of the apartment. To handle the division of assets, I hired a lawyer to ensure I received more than just an equitable split. I sought additional compensation to reflect the years I had managed most of the household chores. Charles, always looking to cut costs, opted against hiring legal representation, giving me a considerable advantage. With the help of my lawyer, we secured a settlement that was highly favorable to me. I was satisfied with the outcome and relieved to have resolved the matter. Meanwhile, Charles's troubles at work were only beginning. His junior team member had been openly critical of his leadership, undermining his authority by declaring he wasn't a proper boss. Charles discovered these complaints, leading to a heated argument, another clear sign of the importance of nurturing and supporting your team, something Charles had evidently neglected. In terms of my career, I had been offered a highly sought-after position at our company's overseas headquarters. Initially, I hesitated to accept due to the personal upheavals and out of consideration for Charles. However, with my personal situation evolving, I decided to embrace the opportunity wholeheartedly. I am now actively preparing for this exciting transition. Though it has caused some concern for my father, we've adapted by practicing video calls to stay connected once I'm abroad. I feel content and excited about the future, ready to fully commit to this new chapter of my life. It's time to pursue the career I've always dreamed of, confident that I've made the right decisions for my future.
At my wedding, a situation unfolded that I could hardly believe. My in-laws, having indulged a bit too much, became the center of whispered gossip among the guests. In a surprising outburst, they confronted me, loudly proclaiming that now that I was married, if I truly wanted to belong to their family, I needed to prove my financial worth. They demanded an additional $5,000 a month, echoing sentiments my father-in-law had previously expressed. The room fell silent. I was left stunned by their audacity, feeling the color drain from my face. Thankfully, my father intervened, taking the microphone. With a firm but calm voice, he addressed them, emphasizing the embarrassment they were causing. His decisive words brought some relief to an otherwise tense moment. My name is Betty Rachel, and I'm a 33-year-old woman engaged to Stephen, a 35-year-old man I met through a friend concerned about my prolonged single status. After losing my mother at a young age, my father took on the role of both parents, working tirelessly to provide for me. This loss deeply affected me, making me guard my emotions closely, and as a result, I rarely dated seriously. Despite my initial reservations about Stephen, his persistent care and respect gradually won me over. He was always a gentleman, and over time, his unwavering support allowed me to open my heart. Dating him brought happiness back into my life, making him incredibly special to me. As my relationship with Stephen deepened, I found myself imagining a future with him, and when he proposed, it felt like the natural next step for us. Stephen had always been incredibly understanding and kind. He would constantly reassure me, saying, "Don't worry, if you ever feel unsure about something, I'll be here for you until you feel better. I love you, Betty. You can always count on me." His words warmed my heart, and I knew I wanted to offer him the same depth of care and commitment. When I shared the news of our engagement with my father, his reaction was one of overwhelming joy. He even shed tears, exclaiming, "Wow, Betty, you're finally getting married. I'm so happy for you." I playfully called him dramatic, but it led to a touching conversation where he revealed his quiet fears that I might never settle down. That moment showed me just how deeply he cared. Thanking my dad felt especially meaningful, knowing how he had raised me on his own. I anticipated that the wedding would be an emotional day for both of us, probably with more tears from him, given how emotional he was now. With our engagement set, Stephen and I began the hectic journey of wedding planning. Balancing our demanding jobs with wedding preparations meant our weekends were packed, leaving little time to rest. But we managed to keep our spirits high, excited for the special day ahead. One of the most anticipated moments was finally meeting Stephen's parents. Although Stephen had already met my father shortly after the proposal, scheduling conflicts had delayed my introduction to his parents. Finally, a visit was arranged, and as we approached their house, I was filled with both excitement and nervousness, eager to see how this meeting would go. I felt a surge of nervousness, but Stephen was quick to comfort me. "Don't worry, my parents are very kind," he assured, helping ease my anxiety as we stepped into what would be a significant new chapter in our lives. When I rang the doorbell at Stephen's family home, his mother greeted us. "Mom, I'm home," Stephen announced cheerfully. She responded with a warm smile, "Welcome home, Stephen. It's so good of you to come." As she engaged in light conversation with her son, I introduced myself politely. "Nice to meet you. My name is Betty, and I'm Stephen's fiancée." Her demeanor shifted subtly as she turned to me, her voice dropping from the cheerful tone she used with Stephen, her smile fading. "So, you're Betty," she said, giving me a long, scrutinizing look that felt more like judgment than a greeting. She led us into the living room, and her cool attitude persisted. "Betty, I'm curious. What do you bring to the table? Stephen is our treasure, our only child. If you're going to marry him, you need to be a suitable wife. Are you worthy of him?" she asked sharply, her tone more like an interrogation than a question. I was taken aback by her sudden harshness and struggled to find words. "You're joining our family, you know. Are you ready for that?" she continued, her words carrying an almost ceremonial weight, as if marrying into her family required some monumental commitment. I wasn't marrying into royalty, so why such heavy expectations? As I pondered how to respond, her patience wore thin. "When I ask you a question, you answer right away. You're so rude," she snapped, her voice rising. Despite feeling overwhelmed, I managed to respond. "I hope that Stephen and I will support each other throughout our marriage." This answer didn't satisfy her, she retorted. "What a naive thing to say. You're not just going to support each other. It's your job as his wife to support him. You don't even understand the basics," she criticized harshly. At this point, Stephen's father, who had been quietly observing, stepped in. "Honey, calm down," he interjected gently, turning to me with an apologetic smile. "Sorry about that, Betty. You must have been startled by my wife's words." His calm demeanor attempted to diffuse the tension. As I tried to remain composed, I reminded myself that Stephen's mother was fiercely protective of her only son. Perhaps her sharpness came from nerves. Just then, Stephen's brother entered the room, his quiet, gentle presence momentarily soothing the atmosphere. But that peace quickly evaporated when he, with a disarming smile, voiced his support for their mother's harsh words. "What my mother says is justified," he said. "What concerns me most is that you come from a single-parent family." Confused, I asked, "What do you mean by that?" "Being raised by just one parent doesn't have a good public image. We can't be too happy about someone like that becoming the wife of our only son, can we?" he explained calmly. "Hold on a minute," I began, as shock and anger flared inside me. I couldn't let his comment pass unchallenged. What's wrong with being raised by a single parent? My father worked incredibly hard to raise me on his own, and I'm proud of him and my upbringing. Being raised by one parent doesn't make me any less capable or valuable, I said, my voice firm. But they continued to argue. Since you were missing one parent, you couldn't have learned how to be a good wife, how to do housework and such, they claimed. I responded, refusing to let their assumptions diminish me. I did plenty of housework to help my father, and I can cook pretty well too. So please don't say that. Despite my rebuttal, Stephen's mother dismissed my words entirely. "I will allow you to marry Stephen," she said, "but in exchange, you must promise to devote everything to us because we are Stephen's parents. Can you promise that?" I was taken aback. "What?" I stammered, unsure how to respond to such a demand. "Since you came here to ask for our permission to marry our son, you do understand your duties, don't you?" she continued, leaving no room for negotiation. Before I could gather my thoughts to articulate a response, the conversation continued, and it became clear that my in-laws were intent on dominating the discussion. I barely had space to express my views. That night, as I reflected on what had happened, I felt overwhelmed by the encounter and deeply unsettled by the dynamics I was about to enter. The evening had been a wake-up call, and I realized I needed to talk to Stephen about how his parents treated me. "Stephen, do your parents always talk to people like that?" I asked gently, hoping for some understanding or support. He seemed unaffected by my question. "What about it?" he replied, clearly not seeing the issue. I tried again, carefully explaining my concerns. "Well, the way your parents spoke to me, and what they said, doesn't that seem unfair?" Stephen shrugged it off. "Oh really? They were just making sure you're ready for the marriage." I understood that his parents were concerned for their son's future, but their approach had felt excessive. It was troubling that Stephen didn't seem to see it the same way. "I get that your parents are worried, but it felt like too much," I pointed out carefully. "Really? Why is that?" Stephen asked, his tone neutral. "They didn't say anything wrong. Besides, they gave us their blessing to get married, so don't worry about it." His response troubled me. It seemed he was more in line with his parents' views than with understanding my feelings. Sensing my unease, Stephen wrapped his arms around me in a reassuring hug. "Betty, you don't have to worry so much," he said softly. My parents are just a little upset because their only son is getting married." Though his words were meant to comfort, they only confirmed that he didn't fully grasp my concerns. "It's all going to be fine. Don't overthink it. I'm sure they just want what's best for us. They want us to be as good of a couple as they are. That's why they were a bit harsh," he added. "Oh," I replied, still feeling unsettled. Stephen seemed to think his parents' high expectations were normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't right for them to judge me simply because I was raised by a single parent. I didn't believe that people who expressed such views were truly supportive partners. We are the ones getting married, I thought, and our focus should be on our love, not their approval or disapproval. Although I was upset, I decided not to dwell too much on his parents' opinions. The wedding day soon arrived, and the venue was filled with our relatives, friends, colleagues, and even bosses. As I walked down the aisle, my father beside me, the man who had lovingly raised me on his own, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Stephen and I exchanged our vows and rings, and the room erupted in applause. Despite the challenges, this was our moment, and I was determined to savor it. As Stephen and I walked back down the aisle together, the reality of our marriage sank in, filling me with a joy I had never experienced before. At the reception, the hall was bustling with excitement. Videos of our journey together played in the background, adding a personal touch to the celebration. It was a joyful time, reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in a while and receiving heartfelt congratulations from so many people. Despite my initial reservations about Stephen's parents, the day had turned out to be one I would always cherish. I felt relieved and genuinely happy that I had chosen to marry Stephen. We planned to officially register our marriage after the ceremony, a step that would make our union legally complete. As the day unfolded, I savored every moment, basking in the joy and celebration. But when it came time for the formalities, greeting our guests and acknowledging everyone's support, a sense of unease began creeping in. Stephen's parents, standing beside us, were visibly unsteady, their faces flushed a deep red. It was clear they had indulged too much in the festivities, and some of our relatives quietly asked if they were all right. Though embarrassed, we pressed on, trying to maintain decorum. When it was time for us to address the guests, the situation took an unexpected turn. Without warning, Stephen's mother grabbed my hand, pulling me away from him with surprising force. Her voice boomed as if she were in a wrestling ring, not a wedding hall. "Listen to me, Betty. After this wedding, you're going to devote yourself to us completely. Prepare yourself. We're going to test you hard." The guests murmured, some laughing awkwardly as if it were a joke, but the tension was undeniable. Before I could react, Stephen's father seized the microphone and pointed at me. "Betty, don't you feel embarrassed wearing a dress like that? It doesn't suit you at all," he sneered. His mother nodded in agreement, piling on the criticism. The murmurs among the guests grew louder, turning from amusement to concern. I turned to Stephen, my eyes pleading for him to step in and stop his parents' humiliating outbursts. This was supposed to be our wedding day, a celebration of love, not a spectacle of disrespect. But Stephen stood frozen, making no move to defend me or our union. The situation escalated when his parents, still intoxicated, began making outrageous demands. "After you register the marriage, you should give us a few $1,000s a month, plus your entire bonus." They insisted, their greed blatant and shocking. I felt my face drain of color as I stood there, utterly stunned. My father, who had been watching the scene unfold, couldn't stay silent any longer. He stepped forward, taking the microphone from Stephen's father with a steady hand. "Enough of this," my father said calmly but firmly. "Don't you realize you're making fools of yourselves?" Stephen's parents, instead of backing down, lashed out, mocking my father for being a single parent. "Single parents are never any good," they jeered, their words cutting deeply. But my father didn't falter. His expression remained composed as he replied, "You people are worse than I imagined. You even refuse to meet me because I'm a single father." Then, with a twist that took everyone by surprise, my father revealed something that changed the tone of the room entirely. "I never imagined that someone like you would work for President Roy," my father said, his voice calm yet pointed. "President Roy is a respectable man, and I always assumed his employees would be just as decent." The mention of President Roy, a business partner of my father's and an old friend, visibly shook my father-in-law. His confident demeanor began to crack. My father continued, "And speaking of single parents, President Roy was raised by his mother alone." He let the weight of his words settle before delivering the final blow. So, you just insulted the president of the company you work for. The realization hit hard. Stephen's parents' faces fell as they grasped the gravity of their mistake. The room shifted, the power dynamic completely reversed. My father-in-law, once bold and arrogant, now appeared small and desperate. "I apologize, sir," he stammered, his bravado gone. "Please, don't tell the president about this." He fell to his knees, pleading, an image that was starkly different from the domineering figure he had been moments ago. For me, this moment was pivotal. It revealed both the true nature of Stephen's family and the strength and connections of my own. But perhaps most telling was Stephen's silence. He stood there, unmoving, unwilling, or unable to protect me from his parents' outbursts. The painful realization struck me: Stephen might never stand up for me. As the tension in the hall reached its peak, guests, caught between shock and amusement, began recording the scene. My father, resolute and unshaken, turned to me. "No matter how much they apologize," he said firmly, "they can't take back their words." He looked me in the eye and asked, "Do you want to leave with me?" Without hesitation, I nodded. I took the microphone from Stephen's limp hand and with a steady voice, addressed everyone in the room. "Thank you for the great entertainment, but there will be no marriage." I paused, making sure everyone, especially Stephen and his parents, understood. "I'll return all the gifts and contributions you've made for this occasion." With that, I left the reception hall, my father by my side. As we exited, I caught a final glimpse of Stephen and his parents, shocked, dismayed, and surrounded by concerned relatives. Behind us, the room descended into chaos. Over the following days, I stayed true to my word. I returned the money and gifts, and to my surprise, many of the guests expressed their admiration for my decision. They commended both my father and me for our integrity and courage in such a difficult situation. The fallout from the wedding was swift and severe for Stephen. His co-workers, many of whom had witnessed the debacle, spread word of the incident. It not only tarnished his reputation but also highlighted his inability to stand up to his unreasonable parents. Embarrassed and unable to face his colleagues, Stephen resigned from his job. The repercussions extended to his father as well. Word of the incident reached President Roy, and he took swift action. Stephen's father was demoted and reassigned to a remote division of the company, a clear message about the company's stance on integrity and respect. Stephen's family found themselves increasingly isolated within their community, shunned by both neighbors and extended family. Their actions at the wedding had led to a social and professional downfall, a stark reminder that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are unavoidable. In the midst of this chaos, my life began to take a new direction. The bond with my father deepened, and we spent more quality time together. One day, he broached a topic that caught me off guard. "Betty, are you interested in running the business?" he asked, his eyes filled with hope and sincerity. I hesitated, unsure. "Do you mean, why don't you work towards becoming the president of my company?" he suggested, confident in my abilities. The idea was daunting, but his belief in me sparked a sense of purpose. "I'll do my best, I promise," excitement and nervousness swirling inside me. From that moment on, I shifted my focus entirely to my career. Romantic entanglements could wait. I was determined to prove not just to my father, but to myself, that I could excel. I dove into learning every aspect of the business, determined to lead with the same strength and integrity my father had always shown. Looking back on the wedding fiasco, it was clear that Stephen's family had been unreasonable, turning what should have been a joyous occasion into a spectacle. Thankfully, since the marriage was never officially registered, I avoided a legally binding mistake. Now free from the burdens of marital drama and in-law complications, I could fully commit to my career. It was liberating to realize that out of chaos had come clarity, a new direction for my future. I'm eager to see where this path leads, and I wish myself all the best as I embrace this new chapter. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you for being part of this journey. I hope you found something valuable in this story. Stay tuned for more updates, and if you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing for the next chapter of my life. My in-laws were drunk at the wedding, but they didn't care even though people were whispering about them. They started yelling at me. It's too late now that you're married, but if you want to be part of this family, you need to show us you have enough money, they said. Yes, your dad is right, so make sure to give us $1,000 a month as a new bonus, they added. I was shocked by their demands. I couldn't believe they would say such things at my wedding reception. I just stared at them, feeling my face go pale. My dad took the microphone from them. Enough is enough. Don't you realize you're embarrassing yourselves? He said. My name is Linda. I am a 30-year-old office worker. I am currently dating Larry, who is 32 years old. I met him through a friend who was worried about me being single, so she introduced us. After dating for a year, Larry proposed, and now we are about to get married. I lost my mother when I was very young, and my father raised me on his own. He worked very hard to take care of me. I didn't have many worries growing up, but losing my mom, who I loved so much, deeply hurt me. Because of this, I was very careful with my emotions. That's why I hadn't dated anyone seriously since my school days. I even thought it would be okay if I stayed single forever. Then I met Larry. At first, I didn't feel any romantic feelings for him, even though he asked me out many times. Larry really cared about me and was always a gentleman. Slowly, I began to open my heart to him, and we started dating. He kept caring for me, and I felt very happy. He became very special to me, and I started thinking I wanted to be with him forever. Then he proposed, and we decided to get married. Larry understood everything about me and was always kind to me no matter what. Don't worry, if you're ever feeling unsure about something, I'll be here for you until you feel better. I love you, Linda. You can count on me, he would say. His words moved me. He promised to make me happy for the rest of my life. Just being with him warmed my heart. If he cared that much for me, I thought I should do the same for him. When I told my father that we decided to get married, he was so happy that he cried. Wow, Linda, you're finally getting married. I'm so happy for you, he said. Oh, Dad, you're being dramatic, I joked. Wow, I hadn't heard anything like that from you until now. I was always worried that you might never get married, he replied. Oh, really? I had no idea you were worried about that, I said. Well, every father worries about his daughter, you know. Anyway, congratulations, he said. Thanks, Dad, I replied. I was so happy to be congratulated by my dad, who had raised me by himself. I thought I would probably cry at the wedding, and my dad would probably cry even more since he was already crying now. With that, Larry and I started preparing for our wedding. We were both busy with our jobs, so our days were very hectic. We worked during the weekdays and made wedding preparations over the weekends. There was no time to rest. Our calendars were always full. On a rare day off, we were supposed to visit Larry's parents' house. I was going to meet Larry's parents for the first time. Larry had come over to meet my father right after he proposed to me. Originally, I had planned to visit Larry's parents right after that to introduce myself. But they were very busy, and our schedules never matched. Finally, some time passed, and we managed to arrange a visit. As we arrived at his parents' house, I suddenly felt nervous. Don't worry, my parents are very kind, Larry reassured me. His words made me feel a bit better, and I rang the doorbell. It was his mother who opened the door. Mom, I'm home, Larry said. Welcome home, Larry. It's so good of you to come, his mother replied warmly. As she talked with her son, I greeted her as politely as I could. Nice to meet you. My name is Linda, and I'm Larry's fiancée. I see, so you're Linda, she said. Her voice was much lower than when she spoke to Larry, and her smile vanished. She looked me up and down as if judging me. Then she led us to the living room, where her cold attitude didn't change. Linda, I'm curious about what you bring to the table. Larry is our treasure and our only child. If you're going to marry him, you need to be a suitable wife. Are you worthy of him? She asked, more like an interrogation. I was taken aback by her question. I hadn't expected such a cold attitude from my future mother-in-law and was at a loss for words. You're going to join our family, you know. Are you ready for that? She continued. True, marrying Larry meant joining his family. But it's not like Larry's family were the Kennedys or some well-known high society family. It's not like I was marrying into a royal family. Why was I being asked to make such a commitment? Besides, I wasn't even going to live with them. I don't like being pressured with questions like these. As I was trying to figure out how to respond, his mother seemed impatient with my slow reply and scolded me harshly. When I ask you a question, answer me right away. You're so rude, she snapped. I'm asking if you're ready for this, she continued, raising her voice. Despite feeling overwhelmed, I managed to say, I hope that Larry and I will support each other in our marriage. When I said that, his mother was not convinced. What a naive thing to say. You aren't just going to support each other. You are supposed to support Larry. It's your job as a wife to support your husband. You don't even understand the basics, she criticized. Then Larry's father, who was sitting next to her, intervened. Honey, calm down. Sorry about that, Linda. You must have been startled by my wife's words, he said, trying to ease the tension. It's all right, I replied, trying to remain calm. His mother is very protective of her only son. Maybe she was just nervous and spoke without thinking. Just then, Larry's brother walked in. He spoke in a quiet, calm, and gentle tone. He seemed like a kind man, which gave me a moment of relief, but that relief was short-lived. With a smile on his face, he said the most unexpected thing. What my wife says is actually justified. What concerns me the most is that you come from a single-parent family. What do you mean by that? I asked, confused. Well, being raised by just one parent doesn't have a good public image. We can't be too happy to have such a person become the wife of our only son, can we? He explained. Hold on a minute, I said, unable to let this comment slide. What is wrong with being raised by a single parent? My father worked very hard to raise me by himself. I am very thankful for my upbringing, and I am proud of my father. Being raised by a single parent doesn't make me any less valuable. But they still argued. Since you were missing one parent, you couldn't have learned how to be a good wife, do housework, and such. I responded, I did a lot of housework to help my father. I can also cook pretty well, so please don't say that. Despite my response, Larry's mother ignored what I said and finally stated, I will allow you to marry Larry, but in exchange, you must promise to devote everything to us because we are Larry's parents. Can you promise me that? I was shocked. What? Since you came here to ask for our permission to marry our son, you do know what your duties are, don't you? Before I could say more, he continued the conversation. I found that my in-laws had completely taken over the conversation, giving me little chance to respond. That night, as I thought more about the marriage, I decided to share my feelings with Larry. Say, Larry, do your parents always talk to people like that? What about it? Larry seemed unfazed. I was surprised that Larry didn't see anything wrong with what his parents had said to me. Well, I mean the way your parents spoke to me and what they said, I tried to explain. Oh really? Well, they were just talking about whether you were ready for this marriage. I get that your parents are worried about their son's marriage, but I feel like what your parents were saying was a bit too much. Really? Why is that? My parents didn't say anything wrong. Besides, they've given us permission to get married, so don't worry about it. That's true, but I felt uneasy that Larry seemed to side with his parents more than with me. That was very troubling. I guess he realized I was feeling unsure because he gave me a hug. Linda, you don't have to worry so much. My parents are just a bit upset because their only son is getting married, he said. He spoke as if he didn't fully support me. It's all going to be fine. Don't overthink it. I'm sure they just want what's best for us. They want us to be as good of a couple as they are. That's why they were a bit harsh. Oh really? I replied, like he said maybe his parents have high expectations for us. But even if that's the case, I don't think it's right for them to belittle me because I was raised by my father. I don't think people who say such things make a good couple. We are the ones getting married, and we should be the focus, not their approval or disapproval. With that perspective, although I was still a bit upset, I decided not to dwell too much on his parents' opinions. Then the day of the wedding arrived. We had many guests, including our relatives, friends, colleagues, and bosses. I walked down the aisle with my father, who had raised me all my life. Larry and I exchanged our vows and rings. We were met with applause, and for the first time, I truly realized that I was getting married to Larry. I felt a happiness I had never felt before. As we walked into the reception hall, we made our way through the crowd, greeted by videos of us as part of the entertainment. It was a joyful time. I chatted with friends I hadn't seen in a while, and many people congratulated us. Despite my earlier worries about his parents, I was glad I had decided to marry Larry. I was glad we decided to have a memorable day. After the ceremony, we planned to officially register our marriage, and Larry and I would become husband and wife. I cherished every moment and felt so happy. Time flew by, and soon it was time for the final part of the event. The bridegroom and both sets of parents lined up to greet the guests. But I started to feel uneasy because of Larry's parents. We were all supposed to be standing in line, but his parents were wobbly on their feet. If you looked closely, you could see that their faces were bright red. They had drunk too much. Some relatives asked if they were okay. My in-laws were clearly drunk. But we had to wrap up the ceremony and get it over with. The moderator handed the microphone to me and Larry. Suddenly, Larry's mother snatched my hand away from him and yelled at me like a professional wrestler in the middle of a challenge. "Listen to me, Linda. After this wedding, you are going to devote yourself to us completely. Prepare yourself because we are going to test you really hard." The guests started whispering to each other, and some even thought it was a joke and laughed. Then Larry's father grabbed the microphone. "Linda, don't you feel embarrassed to wear a dress like that?" "It doesn't suit you at all, dear. You should tell her the truth," his mother chimed in. As expected, the whispers among the guests changed in tone. I looked at Larry, hoping he would stop his father's rude comments, but Larry said he couldn't do that and that his parents weren't doing anything wrong. It became clear he would never protect me from his parents in the future. That was the moment I realized it. I was certain of it even as the hall buzzed around us. My in-laws were drunk and continued to insult me. "Well, you're already married, but if you're going to be part of this family, you need to prove that you have enough money," they said. "Yes, that's right," they continued. "After you register your marriage at the city hall, you should give us a few thousand a month and your entire bonus." I was shocked by their words. I never thought they would say such things at our wedding reception. I just stared at them, feeling my face go pale. My father took the microphone from them. "Enough of this. Don't you realize you're making fools of yourselves?" he said, though still showing some respect. His parents glared at my father. "Why are you interrupting us while we're talking?" I knew this woman's father was no good. "Single parents are never any good," they said. How dare they insult my father? I thought. My father, keeping his cool, replied, "You people are even worse than I imagined. You even refuse to meet me because I am a single father. I never thought that someone like you would work for President Scott. President Scott is such a respectable person. I assumed his employees would be decent as well." At that, my father-in-law's face turned very serious. How do you know President Scott?" "He's a business partner of my company and, more importantly, an old friend of mine," my father explained. "And speaking of single parents, President Scott was raised by his mother alone. So you just insulted the president of the company you work for." Seeing my in-laws' faces fall at my father's words, I realized they finally understood the mess they had gotten themselves into. "I apologize, sir. Please don't tell the president about this," my in-law pleaded, suddenly falling to his knees. Just moments before, he had acted like he was in charge, but now he looked defeated. I could hear laughter from the guests. Some even pulled out their cell phones to record the scene. "No matter how much you apologize, you can't take back your words," my dad said. He walked over to me and asked if I wanted to go home with him. I said yes and took the microphone from Larry's hand. "Thank you for the great entertainment, but there will be no marriage," I announced to Larry and his parents and to everyone who attended. "I will make sure to return the money you gave us for this occasion." Then I left the reception hall with my dad. I caught a glimpse of Larry and his parents looking dismayed, and soon after, his relatives rushed over with worried expressions on their faces. The place must have been in complete chaos. As I returned their money, I apologized to the guests. They all expressed sympathy for me and praised me and my dad for our actions, saying it was good that we weren't taken advantage of by such terrible people. Later, Larry's coworkers who had attended the reception must have spread the word about what happened at his company. Larry became known for having such unreasonable parents and was criticized for having a weak character. His embarrassment was so great that he resigned voluntarily. Of course, the president of my father-in-law's company found out about the incident. Larry's father was demoted and sent to an insignificant division of the company, transferred to a remote office in the countryside. I heard that Larry's family has been ostracized by all his relatives because of what happened at the wedding. While it's unfortunate, it really was their own doing, and sometimes things like that just can't be avoided. In the meantime, I've been using this opportunity to strengthen my relationship with my dad. We've been spending more quality time together, and it's helped me appreciate all he's done for me even more. One day, he sat me down for a serious talk. "Linda, are you interested in running the business?" he asked. looking at me with a mixture of hope and seriousness. "Do you mean?" I started, a bit unsure where he was heading with this. "Why don't you work towards becoming the president of my company?" he suggested. It was a big step, and he seemed to believe I was ready to take it on. "I'll do my best," I promised him, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. I decided then to focus on stepping up my game at work rather than getting entangled in romantic relationships for now. I wanted to prove to myself and to my dad that I could excel and perhaps one day be a great leader like him. Currently, I am deeply involved in learning everything I can at my dad's company. The work is challenging but fulfilling, and I'm determined to make the most of this opportunity. Reflecting on the wedding fiasco, it's clear that Larry's in-laws were quite unreasonable, turning what should have been a beautiful event into a spectacle. Thankfully, since the marriage wasn't officially registered, I was spared from a legally binding mistake. Now, free from any marital ties and with no looming in-law issues, I can focus solely on my career aspirations. It's a relief to know that out of a chaotic situation came a clear path forward for me. I look forward to what the future holds and am excited about the potential of leading the company. I wish myself all the best and hope that anyone watching this story can take something valuable from it. Thank you for staying till the end. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed this story, and I hope to see you in the next video.
You're still here? You reek of old age. Go home already. This harsh outburst came from our oldest son's wife during their housewarming party. My husband and I had come to celebrate our son's new home and were shocked by her audacity. Our son stood up, probably trying to calm his wife down, but beside me, my husband quietly muttered, "Shall we bring this house down?" At his words, our daughter-in-law's arrogant smile turned into a surprised gasp. Little did she know at the time that it wasn't just the house that was at stake, but her entire life as well. My name is Jacqueline Green. I'm 64 years old. I married my husband Sam and moved into his family home, where we lived a contented life. We were blessed with 2 sons, Robert and Ted, both of whom have grown up, have families of their own, and are doing well. As for Sam and me, all we want is to live out our remaining years in peace and happiness. However, there's one little thing that bothers us. It's our oldest son's wife, Alice. From the moment I first met her, I didn't have a good impression. Alice was 24 when she first came over to introduce herself before marrying our son. Although she greeted us at the door with a hello, there was no smile on her face. "Let me see, you're Alice, right?" Since she hadn't introduced herself, I asked my son just to be sure. At my question, Alice scowled. "What, does Robert have other women?" Both Robert and I were taken aback. "What are you talking about?" "Of course not," Robert hastily reassured her. "Well then, why did you need to confirm my name?" Alice started to argue right there on the doorstep. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that." I nervously tried to calm the situation. Even though she was young, I couldn't help but think she lacked common sense, but hoped that time in marriage would improve things. That's what I thought at the time. Both families met, and everything proceeded smoothly. Alice's parents seemed like very nice people. They run a small electrical shop together, and they gave off a good vibe. I thought positively that Alice's initial behavior was perhaps due to her love for Robert. After their wedding, the couple moved to an apartment nearby. A few years later, our younger son Ted also decided to get married. It was a bit of a shotgun wedding. Ted was still in college, and his bride-to-be, Megan, was 20 and working from home after finishing high school. Honestly, we were worried. We had no idea what kind of girl was going to come into our lives, but when we first met Megan, she came with a gift and introduced herself politely at the door. I was surprised. Although we had thought that Alice's behavior was due to her youth, Megan, who was even younger, was very polite and respectful. There were some concerns about how their relationship began, but Megan seemed like a wonderful and kind girl. In the time leading up to their wedding, Megan visited us many times. She always offered to help out around the house. Of course, we couldn't let her do that, but we were incredibly touched by her thoughtfulness. The second son's wife's family owned a small construction company. Ted, who was still in college, decided to drop out and start working there. Then a beautiful baby girl was born to the couple. When the baby turned 6 months old, they decided to hold a belated wedding ceremony. Of course, the eldest son and his wife attended the ceremony. However, Alice looked sullen the whole time. Despite being a part of the family, she was constantly on her phone, never leaving her seat. Both my husband and I wanted to talk to her, but we could tell she gave off a vibe that said, "Don't talk to me." The wedding ceremony went smoothly, but the problem arose after that. Since they had a small baby, they decided not to have an after-party, so we suggested, why not have a small after-party at our house? Ted and Megan were thrilled. We prepared snacks and appetizers, and Robert and Alice joined us at our house. However, a commotion ensued. That was a lovely wedding. "Megan looked beautiful," said the eldest son. Of course, those kind words made the atmosphere pleasant, but it was the eldest son's wife who completely shattered the calm. "What are you saying? Who are you calling beautiful? Are you cheating on me?" she angrily confronted her husband. Everyone was stunned by her overreaction, but I quickly snapped out at it and tried to calm her down. "Alice, calm down. Robert didn't mean it that way." But it seemed like that was a mistake. Now I became the target of her anger. Alice glared at me and shouted, "How did you raise him to be such a cheater? Isn't it your fault for raising him this way?" Then she lunged at me. "Alice, calm down. Alice, please stop. Enough is enough." The children and my husband stepped in to restrain Alice. I immediately told Megan to take the baby somewhere safe and asked her to leave the room. Looking at Alice, who was panting heavily from her outburst, I was sure she must dislike all of us. No, everyone involved with Robert. She sees only Robert. For better or worse, we decided it would be better for Robert's sake to distance ourselves from them, and so we have kept a minimal relationship with them up to now. After the incident, I told Robert, "Don't you think it might be better to divorce?" To which she replied, "I have thought about that too," but when I mentioned it, Alice apologized in tears. After receiving words of apology from her, both my husband and I decided to leave the matter to the two of them. Despite the ups and downs, our eldest son and his wife celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. Since they didn't have children, we didn't have many opportunities to meet with our eldest son and his wife, but we figured it was better to go on without any confrontations causing issues. Both my husband and I thought the same. Then one day, our eldest son contacted us. He said that he had decided to start his own business, focusing on the development of a game he had been working on as a hobby. In other words, our eldest son was going to be the CEO. He said he didn't need a large office to develop his game, but he would hire a few employees and each of them would work from home. Because there would occasionally be a need for meetings, he told us he was planning to build a new house with a small meeting room and his own workspace. My husband and I were very happy to hear that our eldest son was turning his hobby into his career and looking toward the future. A few months later, a mansion was completed. We were invited to the housewarming party along with our second son's family. It had been several years since we last met our eldest son's wife, but she had become a fine adult. I thought there wouldn't be any problems like before. Thinking that, we brought our congratulations and visited our eldest son's home. "Hello, excuse us," I said as I rang the bell. My eldest son came out to greet us. He guided us inside the house, saying, "This is the conference room, this is the workspace, and this is the living area. It's properly locked." He led us to the living room while showing us around the house. "Oh, it's lovely," I said, looking around the room with my husband and a family of our second son following behind, all wearing smiles. A meal was prepared in the living room, but I didn't see my eldest son's wife. "Where is Alice?" I asked my eldest son, but he didn't want to talk about her. In the end, we started eating without her. My husband and second son each gave their housewarming gifts to our eldest son. "You didn't have to do all this," my eldest son said, grateful but accepting the gifts with thanks, acknowledging the celebration. The second son's family had one more child since then, and the older child was already in elementary school while the younger child was still 2 years old. Both of them were excited about the new house. That's when it happened. There was a noise upstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps and someone coming down the stairs. "What? Alice is here," I called out to my eldest son, but he didn't answer. Then, when she entered the living room, she frowned upon seeing us. "Alice, hello, it's been a while," I called out to her, but she was still looking sullen as usual. Then she said to us, "You're still here? You reek of old age. Go home already." Alice's harsh words froze the warm atmosphere in the room. "Hey, Alice, how can you say such a thing?" Robert chastised his wife, but it was clear Alice had no intention of taking his reprimand to heart. "Well, it's the truth, isn't it? Our brand new house is getting ruined because of them. I told you not to invite them over. And what are you, some big shot CEO now? Hanging around with some old codger who keeps working past retirement and people who are so average they had a shotgun wedding after dropping out of college. We live in completely different worlds." I was speechless, and so was my second son's family. Even my grade school grandchild was struck dumb in surprise. I had made various excuses attributing her behavior to her youth or excessive affection for my eldest son, but that was my mistake. Something essential to her humanity is missing. She lacks warmth and kindness towards others. It's not that she loves my eldest son the most. She loves herself above all else and values her status as the wife of a company president more than anything. I was furious. I couldn't stand silent anymore. As I was about to retort, my husband, who had been listening to the argument between my eldest son and his wife, let out a sigh. Usually calm and gentle, he said, "Maybe we should just tear this house down." At my husband's words, my eldest son, second son's family, and I involuntarily looked at him. Nobody could believe that such words had come out of his mouth. Only my eldest son's wife let out a surprised gasp. "What? Do you even understand what you're saying?" Alice asked. "Of course I do," my husband replied. "A house designed by me and built by Ted might be better off not existing." Alice was stunned at my husband's words. "I'm sure you, as the president's wife, wouldn't be satisfied with such a house designed by an old man and built by someone beneath ordinary. Our worlds are different. You should just move out." My husband's calm tone was ironically scary. Knowing this, none of us could interrupt the conversation between him and Alice. "What do you mean?" Alice started to tremble at his words and she glared at my eldest son. Noticing her gaze, my eldest son sighed and said to Alice, "It means exactly what he says. This house was designed by my father, a top architect, and the contractor is Megan's family's firm, with the foreman being Ted. I may hold a title and be a president, but I neither have substantial wealth nor reputation yet. Thanks to my family, I could own such a wonderful house rather among us. I know we are the most ordinary or even beneath ordinary." Alice turned pale at my eldest son's words. She must not have known, but even if she didn't know, didn't she ever wonder? There's no way our eldest son's income and savings alone could have built such an impressive house. My husband didn't even charge for the design work, and there's hardly any profit for our second son's in-laws who run a construction company. I can't thank enough to our second son's in-laws who helped us simply because we're family. Yet our eldest son's wife has the audacity to act pompous just because of her husband's status. Who does she think she is, saying that we're less than average? Alice repeated his words as if she couldn't believe them. You could see the despair on her face. Indeed, my husband still works for a company even after his retirement, but that's because the company asked him to stay on as a top-tier architect. Our second son is being groomed as the next boss at his wife's family business. He gets good treatment not just from his coworkers but also from the business partners that his wife's family has had relationships with for years. And even though he's not yet the president, he's working hard for the company. Yet in this group, Alice is at the bottom of the barrel. Our eldest son laughed, looking at his wife, whose face had turned blue as if she was about to cry at any moment. Our second son also started laughing involuntarily, but the atmosphere was anything but pleasant. Our second son's wife quickly picked up on the mood and took their child to a nearby dollar store. She's really good at reading the room and is very considerate. "Apologize to Dad and Mom properly if you understand." Our eldest son stopped laughing and yelled at his wife. "What? Am I really that bad? You're always on their side. It's only natural for a husband to side with his wife." Alice fought back. "Sure, that's right, but it's also a husband's job to point out when his wife is wrong." "You're wrong. If you have a complaint, quit being my wife right now," our eldest son replied, truly angry. Seeing her husband so angry, Alice quickly changed her attitude and conspicuously knelt down. "I didn't know. You never told me," she said, acting like a tragic heroine. Then, as if intoxicated by her own performance, she turned to my husband and me and began to apologize. "I'm really sorry for the rude things I've said." We watched her act with a blank expression, not feeling a shred of sympathy. Her overly dramatic apology didn't touch our hearts at all, and it was too late to apologize anyway. We had no intention of accepting her superficial apology, just like last time. Seeing his wife in this state, our eldest son asked, "Dad, Mom, what do you think? Am I terrible? Am I doing something wrong?" My husband looked at me, realizing that I had something to say. I couldn't forgive her for her previous remarks, no matter what. "No, Robert, I think you're right. If a wife disrespects her family, it's a husband's duty to correct her. I will reflect and change my attitude." Alice continued her melodramatic act. "No, Alice, this is not the first time you've been disrespectful to us, is it? Haven't you been told this every time by Robert? Robert must have pointed out your words every time, right?" "What about that?" I asked. At my words, Alice bit her lip, turning pale. "I don't meet someone who belittles my husband and son in the Green family. It would be better for both of us to cut ties," I said. "Jacqueline," she cried out in a desperate voice. In our 15 years of marriage, it was the first time she called my name. "We live in different worlds." I threw her words back at her. At those words, Alice collapsed on the spot and froze as if her spirit had left her body. She might be regretting her actions a little bit. Being told that we live in different worlds must have been a significant blow to Alice, even though they were her own words. Although I thought that, my second son said, "Mom, you were really cool." It seemed to be quite a shocking remark for Alice. In the end, my eldest son Robert decided to divorce his wife Alice, who loved Robert so much. When Robert proposed, "If you want to stay with me, Alice, you need to start working and contribute to the mortgage for this house we got at a reduced rate," Alice turned bright red with anger. At the time of their marriage, Robert had told her, "I want my wife to be a homemaker."
After the somber funeral for my father, a prominent shareholder, my brother-in-law caught us off guard by raising the delicate topic of inheritance. The focus shifted to stocks and a substantial $5 million bequest, confidently asserting that my wife, the eldest daughter, and my sister was set to inherit this windfall. The revelation initially filled her with joy at the prospect of a significant inheritance. However, their excitement was short-lived when the family lawyer delivered the disheartening news that my brother-in-law had no legitimate claim to the inheritance. I, Greg Johnson, a 42-year-old office worker, reflected on my father's vibrant life, despite his age of 78. He remained full of vitality, actively engaged in his work. My older sister, a perpetual source of trouble, led a carefree life, causing continuous worry for our parents. In her middle age, she introduced Aaron Corner, a man she intended to marry. Despite his youth and handsomeness, I couldn't warm up to him due to his demeanor. My sister demanded that our father finance her wedding, swiftly depleting the funds and unapologetically seeking more. A year after her marriage, tragedy struck. Our father collapsed while playing golf and passed away a few days later. Overwhelmed by grief, I found myself struggling with the funeral preparations, with no assistance from my sister. After the funeral, a lawyer visited our home to discuss the inheritance outlined in my father's will. While my mother and I were already aware of its contents, my sister and brother-in-law were oblivious until then. They shockingly claimed that the stocks and the $5 million inheritance should go to my wife. Stunned and speechless, my mother and I were taken aback. The lawyer corrected them, revealing that my brother-in-law had no right to inherit. Surprised and disappointed, my sister and her husband expressed disbelief and shock. The lawyer dropped another bombshell. My sister and I did not share the same father. This revelation left my sister furious, demanding an explanation from our mother, who wore an indescribable expression. The long-held family secret had finally come to light, leaving my sister shaken and seeking answers. "I'm sorry," our mother managed to say amidst the shaking emotions. "You are the child of my previous husband." Since childhood, my sister had teased me, claiming that Dad loved her more. Now faced with the truth, she seemed unable to accept it. However, she quickly shifted her stance, suggesting that if she was adopted, she would still have inheritance rights. Aaron chimed in, agreeing with her, yet our mother firmly denied any adoption, causing disbelief. "I'm the eldest daughter, and even Dad said so," my sister angrily declared, glaring at me in response. I felt my anger intensifying as I countered my sister's insatiable desire for more, despite the considerable amount of money our dad had already given her. My brother-in-law chimed in, supporting her claim and stating that it's natural to spend money on one's daughter. However, the lawyer intervened, drawing attention to the questionable spending, including debt repayment, and suggested reviewing the will. My sister panicked, claiming ignorance about any will. It turned out that our father had wanted to discuss and decide the contents with the family, but she had skipped it for frivolous reasons. When the lawyer proposed reviewing the will, my sister and her husband reluctantly agreed. The will clearly stated the transfer of property to my mother and me, explaining why my sister was not adopted. Her mistreatment of me and reckless spending had disappointed our father, realizing she had no right to the inheritance. My sister was visibly shocked, and her brother-in-law, who had initially supported her, suddenly changed his tune, accusing her of lying and abruptly leaving the room. In her anger, my sister blamed our mother for not asking to have her adopted, claiming it was unfair that only Mom received the inheritance. Frustrated, she cried and screamed, expressing her disappointment. Despite my sister's outrageous behavior, the lawyer remained calm, explaining that as the biological son, I had the right to receive it all. Before things escalated further, he warned that the police might need to be involved if the situation continued. My sister appeared startled by the mention of the police, given her history of repeated theft. As my mother spoke tearfully to her, she clicked her tongue and left the room. Half a year passed, and the inheritance proceedings were completed without issue. Despite some grumbling from my sister and brother-in-law, they couldn't stand against the lawyer's efficiency. My mother gave my sister a small amount of money, but I had no intention of interfering. The frustrating part for our family was that the two had disappeared. Their blatant greed was so evident that even our relatives were lost for words. One day, my wife suggested that my mother, daughter, and I go out to eat. Since my father's passing, our mother had been down, but she showed smiles when with her granddaughter. I suggested to my mother, "Why don't you live with us?" But you know, Rook still comes home occasionally. Sis only comes around to beg for money, doesn't she? How long does she plan to keep this up? The reason my mom defends my sister is that she is her blood-related child, and there might be concern that if we visit our family home, my sister might cause trouble again. Understanding that, I told her to take her time thinking about it and then drove my mom to our family home. Upon arrival, we encountered something unexpected. The lights were on in our supposedly empty home. It wasn't the time for the helper to come, so we were puzzled. I parked the car, suggesting, "Let's go up and have some coffee with Mother." We got out of the car and headed to the entrance, but the moment we approached the door, a car came rushing in. "Mom, watch out." Hearing my daughter ahead of me, I shielded my wife with my body. The car just grazed me, and I managed to dodge it, but I collided with a nearby flower bed, injuring myself badly. The car stopped after hitting the garage door. "Are you okay, Dad?" My wife and daughter rushed over, supporting me. Mother was trembling in shock at the sudden event. Understandably, from that moment on, a day of turmoil began. I was taken to the hospital by ambulance and had to be hospitalized briefly. Later, I heard that Aaron Warner, my brother-in-law, was driving the car. According to the police, he explained that he mistook the accelerator for the brake. However, I had my doubts about that story. Amidst all of this, my sister and mother visited me in the hospital. Mother left briefly to arrange flowers, and during that time, my sister coldly looked at me and said, "You're only tough and bodied, huh?" With a slightly disappointed tone, I couldn't help but give her a smile. "If I had died in the accident, Mom would inherit everything, right? Messed up your plan," I said a bit sarcastically, and my sister looked uneasy. "You planned this, didn't you?" When I asked, my sister looked away, and I added, "But I won't be accepting Mom's share, so it won't work out for you." My sister looked surprised at this. She probably thought I would naturally accept it. I have a wife and kids, so I passed the inheritance to them. It's not strange for the head of the family to think that way. Even so, I've made a will early, like Dad did. My sister was taken aback at this. "What? So that means—" "Yeah, unfortunately, my share of the inheritance won't go to Mom." My sister stared at me, then began to shake with anger. "There's $5 million, right? You could at least share a bit." When I immediately refused, my sister furiously grabbed my collar. "I'm your sister. We should split it." Whether it was the amount of the inheritance that drove her mad, she continued to scream in a very aggressive voice. I felt pity for my sister. It's that greedy attitude that disappointed Dad. Don't you get it? My sister's face turned even redder, and she grabbed my neck. "Bro, stop it." Mother, who had just returned, scolded her loudly. Then the nurses, called by the nurses' call button, arrived and escorted my sister out of the room. Mother seemed to want to protect my sister, but my sister had lashed out at her too. As she left, she asked, "Why did she turn out like this?" Hearing Mother say this sadly, I felt a pain in my heart. Later, Mother's health deteriorated, and she fell off, gradually weakening. My wife and I started visiting the family home more frequently to support her, but this seemed to upset my sister. Probably she encountered my wife when coming to ask for money or heard about it from Mother. One day, my sister called my cell phone. "From now on, we will take care of Mom. You guys don't need to come. Watch this." All of a sudden, however, my sister wasn't listening and said, "We've already decided," before hanging up. My wife told me she had been turned away by my sister. Too concerned about how my sister, who had no experience in household chores or living, would manage, I quickly contacted Mother. To my surprise, I found out that my brother-in-law had experience in caregiving. Mother was still independent, not yet in a worrying state. This reassured me. However, within just a month, Mother was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. It was said to be due to a medication dosage error. When we rushed to the hospital, Mother was shockingly weak. The doctors also seemed puzzled by her condition. I couldn't recall such a mistake ever happening before. Leaving my wife to care for Mother, I went to our family home, which was in a terrible state. Despite my mother's love for cooking, the usually well-stocked fridge was shockingly empty. Even the helper had been swiftly dismissed. Feeling ashamed of trusting my sister even a little, anger surged within me. Checking the safe where valuables were kept, I discovered a large amount of money missing from Mother's passbook. The passbook with the inheritance was secure in a bank locker, but there was hardly any money left for living expenses. Returning to my mother, I explained the situation and revealed my sister's betrayal. Brooke did such a thing. Mother seemed unaware of the passbook issue and showed a shocked expression. When asked about the medication error, she explained that my brother-in-law had prepared it and looked troubled. "Mom, I don't think you should let them into that house. They claimed they would take care of you, but the state of that house was the worst. And you've gotten so frail. Haven't they been feeding you properly?" Speaking with concern, I hung her head. "Mom, let's live together. I'll build a new house, and we can live there together." Moved by my suggestion, Mother shed tears. However, her condition continued to worsen. Despite the doctor's best efforts, they, along with my sister, seemed to weigh heavily on her. Ultimately, Mother passed away without recovering. When I went to the family home for the funeral, all the valuable items had disappeared. It seemed that my sister and brother-in-law, in need of money, had taken them. Standing in the desolate place, I was overcome with anger. I had to find a way to make my sister take responsibility for Mother's sake and as atonement for what she had done. I resolved to do something. The day after Mother's funeral, my sister and I met at the lawyer's office to discuss the inheritance. "Condolences, but as her daughter, I'm entitled to Mother's inheritance," my sister said with a sense of superiority that made me laugh involuntarily. She seemed to be under some misconception. "Let's open the will then." As the lawyer revealed the contents of the will, my sister turned pale. "You're joking. Why, bro? You are not entitled to any of the inheritance. This is in accordance with Dad's wishes." My brother-in-law started to get angry, but the lawyer had nothing else to say except repeat the same thing. "This must be a mistake. Bro is her child, isn't she?" My brother-in-law suddenly became furious, throwing things off the table. "Are you trying to trick us? We won't let you get away with this. Give us the inheritance now." "Aaron, you planned to kill Mother, didn't you?" When I asked, my brother-in-law glared at me unpleasantly. "Oh, I wouldn't do such a thing." "Then why did the medication error occur?" My brother-in-law appeared annoyed. "I don't know anything about that. It's impossible that I can't inherit. You must have done something." My sister was getting more agitated. "Now I'm even behind on my condo payments." I was shocked. She hadn't rushed to Mother's side after hearing of her death because she was busy with such matters, hoping for the inheritance. "Really, there's nothing left." My sister pressed the lawyer. "That seems to be the case. Let me explain in detail." The lawyer explained the details of the inheritance. Ultimately, After deducting what my sister had withdrawn and sold, there was hardly anything left for her to inherit. My sister held her head in dismay. I had discussed this in advance with the lawyer. I found satisfaction with the outcome. Stop joking. There can't be so little. My mother and I hadn't told my sister, but most of Mother's property had already been distributed to my children, her grandchildren. Therefore, there was already little left to inherit. However, my sister kept murmuring her dissatisfaction. I felt nothing but resentment towards my sister, who had lived off the money given by father and now mother, thinking she could rest easy knowing I would take care of her. But you just took her money. You are a true disgrace to our parents. I raised my voice in frustration. Caring for someone costs money, you know. Don't you understand? Then show me the receipts for what you spent on Mom's care. I'll cover any necessary expenses. As I extended my hand, my sister turned pale and was at a loss for words. I threw those away. That's not good. Without receipts, it can't be proven as evidence. Hearing the lawyer's words, my sister struggled to find a response. During this, my brother-in-law tried to calm me down. Greg, your sister is in a tough spot. Maybe you could help her out a bit as family. I cannot. My immediate response left my brother-in-law speechless. I've been hurt by my sister for a long time. Frankly, I feel like it's karma, but you're the only siblings, maybe just a little. He tried to say more, but I refused. I was filled with anger, and so was my brother-in-law, apparently. Dan, if that accident had worked out, Rook would have had the entire inheritance. What accident? Before I could ask, my brother-in-law started talking on his own. Because of this brother, things didn't go as planned. I was supposed to get a new car, but now there's barely enough money left even for repairs. My sister tried to stop him, but it was too late. That's a pretty serious statement. You could be accused of fraud. The lawyer held a recorder, smirking at my sister and brother-in-law. What the heck? Isn't that against the rules to do that? You agreed to our conversation being recorded at the beginning, didn't you? Called out by his own words, my brother-in-law's face turned pale. To him, I had one thing to say. Aaron, I will be pressing charges about that accident. Don't joke. Where's the evidence? The evidence has just been provided by you. My sister, crying, began to hit my brother-in-law. You idiot! It's all your fault. Why did you say that? Later, my brother-in-law faced legal consequences for his actions. Additionally, unresolved suspicions about his past emerged, requiring police involvement. For some time, my sister, as an accomplice, was said to face lesser charges. However, struggling with her condo payments, she was turned away by relatives when she asked for money. In contrast, I chose to work earnestly and not rely on inheritance. Now, receiving stock dividends has become a small pleasure in my life. In the aftermath of the legal proceedings, the rift between my sister and me widened. The family bonds that were already strained became nearly non-existent. Despite her attempts to seek support from relatives, my sister faced a cold shoulder and her financial struggles continued. Meanwhile, I focused on building a stable and fulfilling life for my own family, working diligently. I found solace in providing for my wife and children without relying on the tumultuous inheritance battles that had plagued us. The stock dividends became not just a financial benefit, but a symbol of my commitment to a more secure and principled life. Over time, my sister's situation didn't improve. The consequences of her actions weighed heavily on her, both financially and emotionally. It became a stark reminder of the importance of responsible choices and the lasting impact they can have on one's life. As the years passed, I held no ill will towards my sister, recognizing that everyone faces their own battles and makes their own choices. Still, the events that unfolded served as a powerful lesson about the significance of integrity, responsibility, and the enduring consequences of one's actions. In the midst of the turmoil, I found strength in forging ahead with resilience, determined to create a future that wasn't tainted by past misfortunes. The dividends, once a mere financial gain, evolved into a testament to the enduring power of personal growth and the ability to rise above adversity. Life moved forward, and I embraced the opportunities to thrive, leaving behind the shadows of familial discord. The lessons learned from this chapter of my life became an integral part of shaping my values and decisions, ensuring a legacy built on principles rather than the pursuit of material gain. In the end, it was not the inheritance that defined my journey, but the choices made along the way. Choices that led to a life grounded in authenticity, resilience, and a commitment to building a better future for those I cared about the most.
One day, when I got home, I couldn't find my husband anywhere. He had left without telling me, and I couldn't find any clues about where he went. A few days later, I discovered that he and my sister had run away together to get married. That was 12 years ago. Recently, he called me and said he was coming back home with my sister, his wife now, and that I should leave his parents' house. He was upset that I was living there. It's been 12 years since they ran away, and it seems like he wants to make my sister his wife officially now that things have calmed down. But they don't know. They don't realize how much our family, including me, has changed since then. My name is Melanie Miller, and I'm 27 years old. I studied web design and worked at a company where I met my husband, Shane. Shane is a friendly guy who works in sales. We fell in love quickly and got married after a year of dating. After we got married, we moved in with his parents. I quit my job at the company and started working as a freelance web designer from home. I wanted to take care of our home and support my husband's lifestyle. At first, it was hard for me to find a steady job, so my income wasn't always reliable. But now things had changed. I was able to find work easily and make a steady income. I could work at my own pace and prioritize my family. I cherished the time I spent with my husband and his family in the mornings, evenings, and before bed. Life felt really good. But I started to notice a change in my husband's behavior. It began when I started making twice as much money as I did at my previous job just 2 months earlier. I was thrilled to have reached and exceeded my old salary. I couldn't wait to tell my husband when he got home from work. Shane, guess what? Last month, I made twice as much as I used to at my old job. What? Seriously? Your old job paid pretty well, didn't it? Yeah, but I've been wanting more. I finally did it. Yeah, sure, that's great. You want me to throw you a party? My husband's response was unexpectedly sarcastic and negative. I couldn't understand why he was acting that way, so I asked, Shane, are you upset with me about something? Did I do something wrong? I thought you'd be happy for me. Why should I be happy? My salary didn't increase. Well, yes, but can't you just be happy for me, your wife? Really? I'm not like you. I'm just not naturally happy. Shane. After that argument, my husband started to withdraw more and more each day. Our talks became less frequent until I was the only one saying good morning and good night. Even though we had only been married for a year, it felt like we were far from happy. My in-laws, who we lived with, could sense the tension but never said anything. 2 months passed and nothing changed. We ate together in silence, and he always controlled the TV. When I was watching something, he would eat all the food I bought without asking. Whenever I tried to talk to him about it, he would argue, so I stopped bringing it up. One day, while I was cleaning the house, my mother-in-law approached me looking concerned. Melanie, how are you feeling? Are you all right? What do you mean, am I all right? Well, when you and Shane first got married, you used to go out and have a good time together. But lately, it seems like you don't do that much anymore, and you hardly talk. Yeah, but we've only been married for a year, I replied, trying to brush off her concern. I forced a smile to reassure her, but she could tell it wasn't genuine. She looked at me seriously. If you don't want to talk about it, that's okay, but I worry about you. Lately, it seems like you've been feeling down. Well, I'm not pretending to be okay. Your father has noticed it too. We're just concerned that you might be overwhelming yourself. Oh, Mom. I couldn't deny that my husband's discomfort with my higher income might have been partly my fault. But at the same time, I felt alone in my achievement. When my mother finally acknowledged the pain I was feeling, it brought tears to my eyes. So I decided to open up to her completely. After hearing everything I had to say, she started to comfort me and said, I'm so sorry. He's just not mature enough to be genuinely happy for your success. No, it's my fault. I was selfish to expect him to be genuinely happy for me. But you shouldn't have to deal with this alone in a marriage, Melanie. Keeping your feelings bottled up will only make things worse. I don't think it could get any worse. Alright, so you and Shane really need to have a serious conversation about this. Can you do that? Yes, I can. Thank you for confiding in me, honey. She smiled warmly at me. Of course. Then she gave me a comforting pat on the head. My in-laws love me like their own daughter. They've been my support. Taking my mother-in-law's advice to heart, I decided to have a serious talk with my husband. That night, I stayed up late, waiting for him to come home. But as the hours passed, there was no sign of him. He usually got home by 10 at the latest, but it was already past 11, and he still hadn't returned. Why are you taking so long? I texted him, but he didn't respond. I started to worry that something might be wrong. I tried calling him, but he didn't pick up, and the phone just kept ringing. So I waited anxiously. Finally, around midnight, he walked in. I've been trying to reach you, I began, but he just sighed loudly and looked annoyed. What's going on? Why are you still up? Well, I wanted to talk to you about something important today. About what? He replied, sounding annoyed. I think our issues started because of my new salary, right? I should have maybe kept that to myself. I know it might have hurt your pride. As soon as I said that, I felt a shiver down my spine. He was standing there, looking cold and distant. I was scared stiff. He responded with anger. There's nothing to talk about, and it's pathetic that you're waiting up for me. I'm just trying to make things better between us, Shane. That's the problem. I obviously made a mistake in choosing the right partner. No, I'm exhausted from working overtime. You don't have any right to speak, considering you just stay home all day. My husband stormed past me and headed upstairs to our room. I couldn't bring myself to move until I was sure he was upstairs. Why was he talking to me like that? All I wanted was a normal married life. My mother-in-law had encouraged me to talk to him, but it didn't solve anything. After his attitude, I didn't want to push for another conversation. It felt like he completely ignored me as a person, and it left me feeling bitter. 2 more months passed and still we didn't talk. The days seemed endless, slipping by in a blur. Then, one day, I came home to find my husband gone. I went into his room and something felt off. Huh? Shane's room is never this tidy. Shane isn't exactly known for being neat, but his room was strangely clean. His clothes and suitcase were gone. It hit me then, he'd moved out. I tried calling my in-laws, but their phone was either off or disconnected. Just as I was panicking, my sister, Mimi, called me. Hi sis, it's been a while. Mimi, I can't talk right now. Is he? Your husband isn't there, is he? What? How did you know? Something's not right, I said, feeling a sense of unease. I'm with your husband right now. What? What do you mean? Well, I happened to be at the bar, and I ran into him there. We had a drink, and he mentioned that you two weren't really getting along. Mimi, no, you can't be serious. I am. I'm dating him now, and we're planning to get married, so don't try to stop me. Going away. That's ridiculous. Bring Shane back home right now. I'm sorry I can't. I've actually had feelings for him for a while now, and he's tall and handsome. I'm taking him. Then she hung up. I tried calling her back many times, but she never answered. Instead, she sent me pictures. There were dozens of photos of them together, going on dates, smiling. It was really hard for me to see. A few days later, I received the completed divorce papers signed by Shane. When I called his workplace, they told me he had already quit. I knew I couldn't deal with this on my own anymore. I decided to tell my parents and in-laws about what was happening and ask for their support. So Shane and Mimi are together now. He left his job and wants me to sign the divorce papers, I explained. There was a stunned silence. Then my father-in-law spoke up after a moment. Melanie, I'm truly sorry for our son's foolishness. You don't have to forgive us, and you don't owe us anything. Oh, Father, I can't forgive your sister either. You're like a daughter to me. I can't forgive them for hurting my precious daughter. Everyone echoed his sentiment. In that moment, our feelings towards Shane and Mimi changed completely. My in-laws were already considering moving to a new house, and after this they said, we want nothing to do with our son anymore. And they moved without telling him. My parents also decided to cut ties with my sister. If she ever comes back, we'll act like we don't know her. Someone who would betray their own sister like that isn't our daughter, they said. So I decided to go back home to my parents. I asked for alimony from Shane as part of the divorce agreement. He replied, "You'll get it when I get my divorce." Eventually, I received several million yen in alimony along with a message, "Divorce me." Once the divorce was finalized, I cut all ties with Shane and Mimi. It's been 12 years since then, and a lot has changed. My in-laws demolished the house we lived in and sold the land. I've become more successful as a web designer, and my income has grown significantly. Thanks to this, I can travel often with my parents and live a fulfilling life. Today, while I was working, I got a call. Without checking the caller ID, I answered, thinking it was a client. But instantly, it brought back unpleasant memories. "It's been a while, Melanie. How have you been?" Shane's voice echoed. "I knew you'd recognize your ex-husband's voice," he chuckled. "He's still spouting nonsense like before. What do you want? After 12 years, now you want to talk?" I could hear him chuckle. "No, you're in my house. Leave within the next 10 minutes. "What? What are you talking about? We're facing some financial trouble anyway. I'm heading there now. I'm bringing my wife home to our house. You need to leave my parents' house now." It seems he still believes I'm living with his parents. He thinks that after 12 years, things have settled down and they'll finally be accepted. In the background, I hear my sister saying, "That's right, get out of there." But they really have no idea. Do they really think that just because it's been 12 years, everything is forgiven? The world isn't that forgiving, and I won't make it easy for them. But I took a deep breath and replied, "If you want to go home, go ahead. But I'm not at your parents' house anymore." "Oh really? Did my dad kick you out?" "How clueless can you be? Your parents' house is gone, Shane." "Huh? What do you mean it's gone?" Shane's voice started shaking with anxiety. At that moment, he arrived where the house used to stand. He screamed, "What the hell?" And I could hear the pain in his voice. I continued, "As soon as you ran away, we cut ties with both of you. Your parents moved out, and my parents completely disowned the woman you're with. There's nowhere for you to come back to." "Are you serious? How is this even possible?" "Believe it or not, it's up to you, but neither your parents nor mine consider you family anymore. You've proven you're not worthy since you both destroy people's lives." That's awful. But who's to blame for ruining your family? Don't ever call me again. I won't let you ruin my life any more than you already have." With that, I hung up and blocked their number. This time, I cut the last tie. After their failed attempt to go to his parents' house, they tried to come to mine, but my parents have already disowned her. My sister was crying loudly, but my parents just asked, "Who are you?" and ignored them at the gate. Then they both got down on their knees, begging, "Please forgive us. We have nowhere to go, please." Shane was pleading too, "I'm begging you, my parents' house is gone. We have nowhere to go." "Shut up, we don't care. You're not family anymore," my parents said as they sprinkled salt on the front door. "No, please wait, no please, I'm begging you," my father-in-law pleaded. "You don't get to call me that. Get out of here." They were so persistent that my father ended up sprinkling salt on them, and my mother called the cops for trespassing. They haven't been seen since. Last I heard, they were jobless, homeless, and asking their friends for money. But word got around about them, and no one was willing to help. And even if they returned to their hometown, they'd face the same fate. But they brought it on themselves. They made their bed, and now they have to lie in it. My parents and I will never see them again, and they'll spend the rest of their lives regretting their choices. My husband's estate, valued at $80 million along with this house, will be inherited by me as we have no children. My sister-in-law's demeanor is always a challenge to contend with. My name is Emma, a 45-year-old who works part-time. My husband and I are blessed with 2 sons, one a senior and the other a sophomore in high school. The elder one is currently preparing for his college entrance exams, aspiring to follow his passion for law. His ambition was ignited at a tender age, likely influenced by my brother Oliver, who is a seasoned lawyer. A few years back, Oliver established his own law firm, which my eldest son admires greatly. From his early years, my son demonstrated a knack for academic excellence. a trait that Oliver wholeheartedly encouraged upon learning of his nephew's aspirations. Whenever they meet, my son reaffirms his goal to emulate his uncle's legal career, to which Oliver responds with a warm chuckle, urging him to swiftly pursue his dreams and walk in his footsteps. When my brother, who was married but childless, came to visit, he delighted in playing with my sons and showering them with affection. His wife, a woman a decade his junior, kept her distance from our family, rarely gracing our home with her presence. As a result, our interactions with her were few and far between. My brother and I endured the loss of our parents at a young age, leading him to step into a parental role when I was on the brink of marriage. Soon after my wedding, he followed suit and tied the knot himself. My husband and I felt reassured when we learned of my brother's intention to marry a younger woman. However, upon meeting his fiancée, I was taken aback by her perpetually sullen demeanor. We had anticipated joyous exchanges, considering she was about to marry into our family, yet her expression remained persistently glum as she regarded us. In the presence of my brother and his fiancée, I offered a superficial compliment, saying, "You two make a great pair." Yet my true sentiments emerged only in the quiet moments at home with my husband. I couldn't shake off the curiosity about why she seemed so discontented. As their marriage was sealed, my husband echoed my concerns, remarking with a hint of worry, "She didn't seem particularly joyful as a bride. It's a bit concerning, isn't it?" Shortly before their wedding, my brother tied the knot with his 10 years younger fiancée. To celebrate, my husband, our children, and I paid them a visit at their newly acquired house. The grandeur of the place left me in awe, a testament to my brother's success as a law firm owner. However, the absence of my sister-in-law raised eyebrows. In jest, my husband quipped to my brother, "Has your wife already abandoned ship?" Though meant in good humor, the tension in my brother's reaction left us both uneasy. According to him, whenever there's trouble, his wife retreats to her parents' home. Today, she stayed over to celebrate her mother's birthday. My husband's expression drooped, perhaps regretting his attempt at humor. Then, out of the blue, my brother posed a serious question with a poker face. "If I were ever unable to have children, would you consider letting me adopt one of yours?" I initially brushed it off as a jest, but my brother's earnest demeanor suggested otherwise. Stunned by the unexpected proposal, I found myself unable to respond, while my husband, with a chuckle, replied, "Who knows what the future holds? Let's cross that bridge when we come to it. If you're serious, and if our children are comfortable with it, we can discuss it then." Though my husband seemed to take it lightly, I couldn't shake off the underlying concerns about both the adoption suggestion and the strained relationship between my brother and his wife. It wasn't my place to interfere in their marital issues, but I couldn't help but worry. Subsequently, whether it was our visits to my brother's home or his visits to ours, he always came alone. His wife was conspicuously absent, further fueling my apprehensions. My brother never brought up his wife, so I refrained from prying into their relationship. After over a decade of marriage, her presence faded into obscurity in my mind. This year, as my eldest son's acceptance into his dream law school was celebrated at our house, my brother broached the topic of adoption once again. "Just as I mentioned before, would you consider allowing me to adopt one of your children?" he inquired. Their inability to conceive led him to revisit the idea. The last time we discussed it, they were newlyweds, so there was no urgency. Yet this time, my brother's tone conveyed seriousness. Despite the weight of the proposal, my husband's response was swift and nonchalant. "Would you prefer our eldest son, considering his ambition to become a lawyer?" he quipped. While my husband's manner seemed casual, I remained cautious, mindful of the profound impact such a decision would have on our sons' lives. Even though my brother, their uncle, would be adopting them, I couldn't shake the worry about my sister-in-law's potential treatment of my sons, who wouldn't be her own flesh and blood. Seeking reassurance, I cautiously asked my brother, "Is your wife on board with the adoption?" His response, accompanied by a wry smile, was somewhat comforting. "Don't fret over her. We've discussed it already," he assured me. While I felt relieved knowing they had addressed the matter, I couldn't reach a decision immediately. Instead, I resolved to involve my sons in the discussion and let them weigh in, considering they were already in high school and capable of making their own choices. We left the matter unresolved that day, but a few days later, I received an urgent call from my brother's lawyer's office. They informed me that he had collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. Frantically, I made my way there, only to find the law firm staff anxiously awaiting news. It appeared my brother had suffered a stroke at work and was now unconscious. Once I arrived, the law firm staff departed, leaving me to confront the worrying situation alone. The law firm staff also mentioned they couldn't reach my sister-in-law. I tried calling the landline, but received no answer, and I didn't have her cell phone number. Eventually, my husband and younger son arrived, but still there was no luck reaching her. It was my younger son who stumbled upon a smartphone amidst my brother's belongings. With some effort, we managed to unlock it and began searching for her contact details. When she finally picked up the call from that phone, her response was laced with anger. "I warned you not to call again. I'll take legal action," she snapped. Attempting to convey urgency amidst her tirade, I interjected, "It's Emma, Oliver's sister. My brother has collapsed and is in the hospital." Her tone softened upon realizing it was me on the line. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I mistook you for Oliver. You said he collapsed?" she inquired. After updating her on my brother's condition and the hospital he was admitted to, her response took a surprisingly casual turn. "I'm unable to come to the hospital right now due to prior commitments. Please keep me informed," she requested before abruptly ending the call. I couldn't help but wonder if my sister-in-law had more pressing matters to attend to, especially considering her husband's illness. With the realization that she wouldn't be of any assistance, we resolved to care for my brother ourselves. Since my eldest son had completed his university entrance exams and was spending most of his time at home, he took on the responsibility of visiting my brother daily on my behalf. Despite our efforts, my brother remained unconscious and in critical condition. However, my sister-in-law never reached out or made an appearance at the hospital. Nearly a week after my brother was admitted, I made another attempt to contact her. This time, she answered the phone promptly, her tone oddly cheerful. "What's the matter? Is he dead?" she exclaimed, lacking any semblance of empathy. Struggling to contain my anger, I responded calmly, "He's still alive. Why haven't you visited him at the hospital?" Her response, dripping with indifference, only fueled my frustration. "I'm neither a doctor nor a miracle worker. There's nothing I can do for his recovery," she retorted dismissively. Her callous demeanor pushed me over the edge and I hung up the phone, unable to suppress my growing rage. Suspicions began to brew within me regarding my brother's motives for wanting to adopt one of my sons. It dawned on me that perhaps he had resigned himself to the idea of not having children with his wife, indicating possible discord in their marriage. Curiosity led me to inquire about how they met after their marriage was finalized, to which my brother revealed they had been introduced through a marriage counseling agency. The revelation stirred a mix of emotions within me, especially the notion that my sister-in-law may have married my brother solely for the security of his profession as a lawyer and the promise of a comfortable life. This thought fueled my indignation further, but when I confided in my husband, his response cut deeper. If Oliver were to pass away in his current state, his wife would inherit the entire estate given their lack of children, he remarked callously. As my brother joined us to celebrate my eldest son's recent achievements and broached the topic of adoption, I couldn't shake the suspicion that perhaps his interest stemmed from considerations of inheritance rather than genuine familial intentions. I wish I could have reached a decision then and there, but the situation left me feeling powerless. After my brother's departure that day, I casually broached the topic with my two sons. To my surprise, my younger son expressed eagerness to be adopted, viewing it as a ticket to an easier life under Oliver's wing. Unlike his older brother, he seemed content to go with the flow, lacking clear aspirations for the future. I had anticipated my eldest son, who admired his brother, to follow suit, but his response caught me off guard. "I don't want to be adopted," he declared firmly. "As the eldest, it's my responsibility to take care of you, Mom, and Dad." His words filled me with pride, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that my eldest son, with his ambition to become a lawyer, was the more suitable candidate for adoption. Although I longed to initiate the adoption process on behalf of my unconscious brother, the circumstances thwarted my efforts. Despite my reluctance to claim any share of my brother's inheritance, I couldn't bear the thought of a single penny falling into the hands of my sister-in-law, who seemed to be eagerly awaiting his demise. I could only hold on to the hope of my brother's recovery, but it never came to fruition. Days later, he passed away, leaving me with the solemn duty of informing my sister-in-law. "My brother has passed away. "Can we arrange a funeral?" I conveyed the somber news. To my surprise, her response was oddly cheerful. "You have the final say. Just please don't involve me in any formalities," she replied before abruptly ending the call. Feeling a surge of frustration, I held back my emotions as my husband and I took charge of planning the funeral. With assistance from the law firm's staff, we navigated through the arrangements. While my husband expressed concerns about the firm's future, my brother had already ensured its stability by entrusting its management to a capable individual. Thus, the firm would continue to operate seamlessly as a corporation. At the funeral, the turnout was overwhelming, with countless wreaths brought in to pay respects. The hall overflowed with mourners, a testament to the profound impact my brother had on so many lives. As the funeral unfolded, I found myself once again marveling at the incredible person my brother had been. Alongside me, my son lent a hand in the somber proceedings. However, his mood darkened upon witnessing the notable figures in attendance, presidents of major corporations, politicians, and other dignitaries. "I should have been the one adopted," he lamented bitterly. "I never realized how remarkable he truly was." My husband and I empathized with his sorrow, understanding the weight of his realization. As I fulfilled my role as a pallbearer, no one questioned the absence of my sister-in-law, nor was it brought up in conversation. I couldn't help but wonder if we were the only ones privy to the knowledge of my brother's marriage. They hadn't had a wedding ceremony, instead they simply embarked on a honeymoon. It dawned on me that even our relatives might have been unaware of their marital status. Reflecting on the situation, I couldn't help but harbor regrets. If only they hadn't married, there wouldn't be a need for a wife who failed to show up at her husband's funeral. And I lamented not allowing my brother to adopt my younger son sooner, fearing that she might seize control of my brother's estate with the support of the law firm's staff. The funeral for my brother had concluded, and I extended invitations for everyone to gather at his house for a meal, expressing my gratitude. "Thanks to all of you, my brother will be able to rest in peace," I said, my voice laden with sorrow. As we mourned together, my sister-in-law made a sudden appearance, clad in a flashy pink coat, as if timed to coincide with the conclusion of the funeral. Addressing her with a mix of surprise and suspicion, I asked, "Why have you chosen this moment to come?" With a wide grin on her face, she spoke loudly for all to hear. "As my husband's wife, I inherit his estate, valued at $80 million, along with this house. With no children in the picture, everything belongs to me." Her triumphant declaration prompted laughter from my brother's colleagues, leaving us puzzled by their reaction. My sister-in-law shot them a glare and scolded, "What's so funny? How rude." Her smirk quickly faded when one of the lawyers interjected, "We're aware that you're officially divorced." The revelation hit me like a thunderbolt. "You were divorced?" I exclaimed incredulously upon hearing the news the day before my brother's collapse. Glancing at my sister-in-law's visage, I saw a chilling expression etched across her features as she locked eyes with the individuals who had unveiled the truth. As she gritted her teeth, another lawyer interjected, "I've also heard that you were ordered to pay alimony due to the affair that led to the divorce. It's unavoidable." Furious, my sister-in-law directed her glare at the lawyer who spoke, snapping, "I'm not obligated to pay alimony anymore. There's no one left to pay." Her words dripped with disdain, but she was swiftly rebutted by the legal expert. "The right to alimony also transfers upon inheritance, so you'll still owe it to Emma, the sole inheritor." It dawned on me for the first time that I was the sole inheritor of my brother's estate. With their divorce finalized and our parents no longer alive, I was left as the last remaining family member. She seemed to grasp the reality of the situation, her expression morphing into one of horror as she locked eyes with me, prompting me to instinctively step back. Yet her demeanor remained defiant as she resumed her tirade. "Don't I deserve half of the estate now that the divorce is settled?" A lawyer, looking dismayed, interjected, "Didn't Oliver provide you with funds upon the finalization of the divorce?" "I have the receipt certificate." Another lawyer chimed in, "He also acquired a house prior to the marriage, so it isn't subject to property division." I found a sense of satisfaction in witnessing her being lectured by the lawyers. Despite her protestations, she appeared to recall something and chuckled lightly as she continued, "There's still the life insurance. I should be the beneficiary." Her resilience impressed me, navigating through a hostile environment where everyone seemed to be against her. Then, with a smirk, she added, I changed the beneficiary of Oliver's life insurance to myself. However, the lawyer promptly refuted her claim regarding the life insurance, stating, Oliver was a resolute individual, so it's likely he made the change upon finalizing the divorce. As I sifted through my brother's belongings, I stumbled upon the life insurance policy, but my sister-in-law caught sight of it. Swiftly, she snatched the document from my grasp, her impatience evident as she scrutinized the beneficiary. However, her demeanor shifted to one of disappointment as she handed the certificate back to me, her shoulders slumping in defeat. It was then that I noticed the beneficiary was me. Realizing her efforts were futile, my sister-in-law blurted out her true sentiments without filter. I married a lawyer because I thought he was wealthy. But all I got was a pittance, and now I have to pay alimony. It's a colossal mistake. In response, the lawyer's expression hardened as he retorted. Oliver expressed similar sentiments. He regretted seeking the counsel of a marriage counselor, lamenting the monumental mistake he had made. Although my brother never confided such sentiments to me, his honesty was well known among his colleagues and subordinates. Faced with undeniable facts, my sister-in-law turned on her heel and departed from my brother's house. As time passed, she found herself obligated to pay alimony in installments, despite lacking stable employment. Desperate to fulfill her financial obligations, she hastily sought out employment opportunities. However, her lack of commitment led to a string of short-lived jobs. In a desperate attempt to secure quick wealth, she returned to the marriage counseling agency and set her sights on a wealthy individual. Deceiving him with promises of financial gain through marriage, she exploited his trust and attempted to swindle him. Yet, her scheme unraveled swiftly when the man saw through her deceit and reported her to the authorities. Subsequently, she was arrested for marriage fraud, facing the consequences of her actions. According to a lawyer from my brother's law firm who disclosed the truth, no alimony was ever paid to me. When I consulted the lawyer regarding the situation, I was informed of the recent developments. It was in May when the lawyer relayed the news that my sister-in-law had been apprehended. With her arrest, the likelihood of receiving alimony payments seemed slim in the foreseeable future. However, alimony wasn't my foremost concern. What I truly desired was to witness her facing the consequences of her actions and enduring a fate befitting her deeds. I firmly believe my brother would concur, which is why I wish for thorough police investigation into her other transgressions. I hope she's charged as a felon and brought to justice in court. Meanwhile, my family relocated to a house left behind by my brother, unexpectedly inheriting his property. My husband and sons were overjoyed at the prospect of moving into a spacious house, a stark contrast to our previous cramped apartment. Amidst the excitement, my eldest son, fueled by newfound determination, immersed himself in his law studies. Observing the interactions between his brother's colleagues and subordinates, he felt a strong yearning to pursue a career in law. Though never formally adopted by my brother, I hold on to the hope that he will carry forth my brother's legacy and excel as a lawyer, just as he aspired to be. However, my younger son harbored a sense of disappointment upon learning that I had inherited my brother's entire estate. I wish I had been adopted by uncle so I could have inherited everything, he confessed candidly. Despite his words carrying a hint of jest, his smile betrayed a hint of genuine longing.
I find myself in a predicament, entangled in a web of familial expectations and financial disputes within my marriage. The notion of inheriting my rightful share seems to be slipping away, overshadowed by the relentless pursuit of wealth by my husband and mother-in-law. In the realm of matrimony, one would assume that an inheritance is a natural entitlement. Yet in my case, it appears to be an elusive right, as both my husband and mother-in-law exhibit an unwavering fixation on money. Their covetous tendencies extend beyond mere possession, venturing into the audacious territory of claiming my late father's hard-earned legacy as their own. The audacity of surrendering my father's amassed wealth to these individuals is inconceivable. Unforgivable, in fact. My resolve strengthens with each passing day, and I am determined not to succumb to their voracious desires. Allow me to introduce myself. A 44-year-old navigating the complexities of a 20-year-old marriage. Amidst the delicate balancing act of household responsibilities and a demanding job, my husband John, aged 46, toils away at a supermarket near the station. Our paths crossed during my university years, a chance encounter at the very supermarket where I held a part-time job. Casual dating evolved into marriage at the age of 24, and our union now includes our son, Bill, who recently embarked on his journey into university life this spring. The fabric of my life is woven with fulfilling responsibilities, but a disquieting undercurrent persists: my husband's reckless spending habits. While the right to spend our hard-earned money is undeniable, his unrelenting demands for additional funds, accompanied by a lack of transparency, only serve to exacerbate the situation. In the presence of my husband and his parents, financial matters become a battleground. My resistance to their insatiable demands is met with vehement opposition, and the atmosphere becomes charged with tension. My son, Bill, thankfully, shares my sentiments towards his grandparents and ensures his absence whenever they make an appearance. However, a startling revelation from Bill unveils a new layer of turmoil. The revelation of my husband's infidelity, witnessed firsthand by our son, leaves me more disheartened than angry. Bill, advocating for a divorce, echoes my sentiments. Though reassured by my son's support, I decide to confront my husband before taking any drastic steps. As I prepare to address the issue, an unexpected intrusion occurs. My husband and his parents barge into our living room. Seemingly innocuous, their visit takes a turn when my husband proposes an extravagant trip to Hawaii, accompanied by a demand for a substantial sum of $5,000. Frustration reaches its peak, prompting me to confront them not only about their financial expectations, but also about my husband's infidelity. The room falls silent, and I brace myself for the repercussions of this revelation. Prepared to confront my husband as planned, I confronted him about the allegations of infidelity. His initial response was one of denial and confusion, questioning the need for proof and asserting his innocence. I pointed out that someone had witnessed him entering a hotel with another woman, to which he responded by challenging the credibility of the observer. Frustrated, I hesitated, not wanting my anger to be directed at our son, Bill, who had shared the unsettling revelation. Astonishingly, my mother-in-law dismissed the seriousness of the accusation, suggesting that forgiving a cheat or two is normal for men. I found it incredulous that a woman herself could condone such behavior. However, the urgency shifted to their demand for money for a Hawaii trip, a distraction my husband readily embraced, leaving the matter of his infidelity unresolved. Exasperated with these constant financial disputes and moral insensitivity, I decided that it was time to sever ties. Calmly, I announced that we were getting a divorce. In response, my husband threatened to claim my parents' mansion as part of the property division if the separation proceeded. As tensions escalated during our argument, my cell phone rang, interrupting the heated exchange. It was my uncle, my father's brother, bearing unsettling news. My father had collapsed, lost consciousness, and was rushed to the hospital by ambulance. Urgently summoned to the hospital, I explained the situation to my husband and his parents before departing. Upon arriving at the hospital, I discovered that my father was stable but not in optimal condition. My father, age 67, had dedicated his life to the family business, overcoming initial challenges to provide a comfortable life for us. The news of his sudden health crisis left me emotionally shaken, prompting me to reflect on his irreplaceable role in my life. Days later, my father regained consciousness, alleviating some concerns. Visiting him with Bill, we shared a moment of relief and concern. However, the doctor's subsequent call revealed the severity of my father's condition, exacerbated by years of overwork. In the following days, my father passed away, and grief enveloped me. Throughout this difficult time, Bill remained a steadfast source of support. As an only child, I shouldered the responsibility of funeral preparations and my husband's indifference only heightened my emotional burden. At the funeral, my in-laws made an appearance, expressing admiration for the family home and insensitive curiosity about its value. In the aftermath of the memorial services, while attempting to come to terms with my father's passing, my in-laws, father-in-law, and mother-in-law made a sudden visit. Their focus, however, remained on the materialistic aspects, with my mother-in-law fixating on the grandeur of the house and my father-in-law probing into its potential value. Their departure, seemingly content with their financial inquiries, left me speechless. As I began to cope with the grieving process and put away funeral clothes at home, a new wave of confusion emerged. My parents were on their way over, and I was left wondering about the purpose of their unexpected visit. My initial apprehension deepened as I awaited the arrival of my parents, anticipating another discussion veering towards financial matters. In a solemn attempt to understand their motives, I resolved to engage in conversation upon their arrival. As they entered, my in-laws wore satisfied grins, taking their places on the sofa. The atmosphere tensed when my husband abruptly suggested we move from our spacious house, proposing that his parents join us in our new abode. Baffled by this sudden proposition, I reiterated my intention to proceed with the divorce, a decision fueled by my commitment to address my late father's affairs. However, my husband, dismissing the notion of infidelity and divorce, casually declared his intent to share everything between spouses. This included the inheritance, a claim he justified as his right as a husband. Their audacious assumption that all the inheritance belonged to them infuriated me, and their whimsical discussions about room preferences in a new mansion only fueled my frustration. Determined to thwart their plans and protect the legacy my father had worked hard to build, I vowed never to let them have their way. The audacity of my husband and his parents, treating my father's house and wealth as if it were rightfully theirs, had pushed my patience beyond its limits. A few days later, a call from my uncle brought a brief respite. His words of comfort and support reassured me that I had done well amidst the challenges. However, the conversation took an unexpected turn when my uncle expressed a pressing need to meet and share crucial information. Intrigued and apprehensive, I agreed to meet him that night. As my uncle disclosed shocking revelations about my husband and in-laws, I found myself grappling with the gravity of the situation. Determined to seek guidance, I confided in my uncle, sharing the preposterous demands and claims made by my husband and in-laws. My uncle, furious at their audacity, assured me that he would handle the situation. Intrigued by my uncle's plan, I eagerly met with him again the following day, this time accompanied by Bill. The plan unfolded, aiming to enlighten Bill about his father and grandparents and prepare him for the challenging road ahead. Braced for the confrontation, I summoned my in-laws to our house, bringing together the 6 of us, my husband, Bill, and the 3 of them. The discussion centered around the prospect of all 6 of us living in my family home. The proposal caught them off guard, and after confirming their seriousness, my mother-in-law enthusiastically endorsed the idea, expressing eagerness to live in what she deemed a dreamlike mansion. The elation, however, was short-lived. Reality struck when my father-in-law reminded us of the cancellation fee for their previously planned trip, insisting on reimbursement. Appalled by their audacious demands, I realized the depth of their selfishness. Unfazed, my mother-in-law reassured us that they would recoup the money soon enough, dismissing the urgency of the situation. Accustomed to my husband and in-laws' relentless pursuit of money, I had grown somewhat immune to their schemes. However, Bill, unaccustomed to their blatant money-grabbing tendencies, appeared visibly upset and angered by their audacity. In an attempt to soothe him, I gently patted Bill's shoulder, assuring him that we would handle the situation. As the conversation revolved around the proposed move into my family home, I decided to play along, knowing well that their assumptions were far from reality. John, my husband, questioned the logistics of the move, displaying an unusual sharpness in his tone. Attempting to deflect the tension, I explained that Bill and I would go ahead to prepare the house, emphasizing that it was a considerable task requiring early action. However, John's skepticism lingered, and he questioned Bill's ability to handle household tasks, especially since he was still a student. I managed to navigate the conversation by suggesting that Bill could manage his responsibilities, though John continued to resist over trivial matters. Despite his resistance, my mother-in-law remained in good spirits, seemingly oblivious to the underlying tension. The conversation inadvertently shifted towards the size of the mansion and the number of rooms, with my mother-in-law expressing excitement. Seizing the opportunity, I assured them that they could choose their rooms first and even proposed a gradual process of tidying up, considering my work schedule. My calculated responses allowed me to temporarily deflect their expectations, leaving them satisfied with their perceived victory. In my mind, I harbored a plan to undermine their assumptions and bring them down from their lofty expectations. The moving day was set a month later, and I eagerly anticipated the final showdown. On the decisive day, my husband and in-laws arrived with a moving truck, expecting to take possession of what they believed to be their new home. Bill and I awaited them in front of the entrance. Ignoring my husband's attempt at humor, I observed the sparkles of excitement in my in-laws' eyes. Little did they know that the impending revelation would shatter their illusions. As my husband made light of the situation, the gate opened, and my uncle, my father's brother, emerged from the house. Silent and imposing, my uncle confronted them, leaving my husband and in-laws puzzled. It became evident that my husband barely remembered my uncle from the funeral. Setting the record straight, my uncle asserted his ownership of the house and clarified the inheritance distribution. The shock on my husband and in-laws' faces grew as they realized the gravity of their misconceptions. Despite my uncle's assertive explanation, my husband remained calm, seemingly attempting to move past the confrontation. In a sudden turn of events, Bill intervened, accusing his father of infidelity. The revelation left my husband shocked and exposed, unable to hide from the truth his son had uncovered. Observing my father entering a hotel with another woman confirmed my suspicions of his infidelity. However, when confronted, he adamantly denied the accusations, refusing to admit to his transgressions. In response, Bill, my son, urged his father to leave our lives, emphasizing the impact of his actions on our family. Despite this plea, my in-laws remained fixated on financial gains, insisting on a proper property division if a divorce were to proceed. My in-laws boldly declared that they had relinquished their apartment and quit their jobs to partake in a life of leisure in the assumed family mansion. Their presumptuous demands left me astounded, especially when they revealed that both my husband and father-in-law had quit their jobs. I questioned their rationale, bewildered by their abrupt decisions and the apparent reliance on my father's inheritance. In response to their audacious claims, I asserted my rightful inheritance as my father's child, anticipating a substantial property division. To my relief, my uncle, a lawyer, intervened to handle the legal proceedings. He exposed my husband's infidelity, supported by evidence gathered during a month-long investigation. The revelation left my husband and in-laws stunned, and they finally began to comprehend the severity of the situation. With my uncle's guidance, I firmly informed them to handle all matters through legal channels and requested they never show their faces to me again. Despite a momentary glare from my husband, they left, and I expressed my gratitude to my uncle for his invaluable support. Following the legal proceedings, Bill and I moved into the family home, fulfilling my father's and grandfather's wishes. Grateful for the opportunity to live in a house filled with memories, I thanked my uncle for the life-changing experience. Bill, having learned from his uncle's guidance, dedicated himself to his studies, aspiring to become a successful lawyer. My ex-husband and his parents found themselves in a challenging situation, residing in an old apartment and struggling to secure new employment. The consequences of their actions began to unravel as my ex-husband reached out for financial assistance. However, having severed all ties, I refused to lend him money, enforcing the newfound estrangement. In the aftermath, my ex-husband's life took an unexpected turn. He resorted to part-time and day jobs, attempting to navigate the consequences of his choices. Their elaborate plan to borrow money for a non-existent luxury trip further exposed the depths of their deception. Grateful for the weight lifted off my shoulders, I focused on my career, with the immediate goal of witnessing Bill successfully graduate from college. Hello, I am a single woman in my 60s. Since childhood, I held on to the belief in a reciprocal philosophy, thinking that my hard work and dedication would be met with equal effort in return. This mindset extended to my relationships, where I believed treating others kindly would result in receiving kindness in return. Even after marriage, I continued to hold this belief, assuming that by being considerate to my husband, he would reciprocate. In today's world, women aren't expected to sacrifice as much. But during my era, societal expectations were different. I willingly made sacrifices for my husband and children, confident that my efforts would contribute to future happiness. However, my marriage and family life didn't unfold as expected. Despite my early mornings and diligent work for the family, complaints and mistakes overshadowed appreciation. At that time, no one mandated that I live this way. I was an ordinary person who married a coworker 4 years my senior due to societal expectations. Despite the societal norms for married women to quit their jobs, I became a full-time housewife after giving birth to my daughter. I had no regrets. I believed it was a natural course of action for family life. Though my life wasn't glamorous like TV dramas, it felt easy and stable. Around my daughter's 9th grade, tragedy struck when my mother passed away suddenly from a heart attack. While mourning her loss, I discovered my husband's affair. In the midst of my grief, he found joy elsewhere, becoming uncaring and eventually demanding a divorce. Despite my determination to avoid divorce, my husband's behavior became unbearable. Divorce wasn't as socially acceptable back then, and despite an irresponsible and unkind husband, I resisted the idea. Looking back, I realized my naivety, but more was at stake. My daughter, witnessing the turmoil, felt the impact. Despite my refusal to divorce, I found myself in a deeply miserable situation. During a heated argument about our impending divorce, my father unexpectedly visited. Witnessing the distress in our relationship, he offered me a place to live and encouraged me to leave my husband, taking my daughter with me. Having recently lost his wife and observed his daughter in an unhappy marriage, my father convinced me that persisting in such a difficult situation was futile. Feeling the weight of his concern, I yielded to my husband's request for a divorce. In return, my husband provided me with $3,000 in cash. With my father's support, I secured a 2-bedroom townhouse to live in with my daughter, starting anew. I anticipated the need to work hard to support my daughter, fearing judgment from society for being a divorced woman with a daughter. This concern was particularly heightened as my daughter entered adolescence. During this challenging period, my daughter expressed typical desires of her age, lamenting the perceived consequences of her parents' divorce. Despite the emotional hurt, I knew I couldn't dwell on them forever, determined to provide for my daughter. I embarked on the journey of seeking stable employment. However, being an older divorced woman with a child made securing a job challenging. Undeterred, I took on multiple part-time and nighttime jobs, even engaging in freelance work at home whenever possible. As time passed, my daughter advanced to her senior year of high school. Despite financial constraints, she excelled academically, finding her own way to thrive. Motivated by my desire to ensure her future, I secured a job at a 24-hour restaurant, working 12-hour shifts. 2/3 of my earnings were diligently saved for her college tuition. Despite facing judgment and gossip, especially from some married men who viewed me as an easy target, I persevered for the sake of my daughter. The sacrifices were numerous, but my goal was to provide her with opportunities I never had. As she approached adulthood, I hoped she would understand the struggles I faced in raising her and making a living. Reflecting on these challenges, I realized that having a daughter made my situation both more arduous and meaningful. She became my anchor, giving me the strength to endure and persevere through life's challenges. I held on to the belief that In the future, my grown daughter and I would share stories about the hardships we faced and take pride in our resilience. A year later, my daughter's outstanding performance in the SAT exams earned her admission to Harvard University, a moment of immense joy that made all the previous struggles worthwhile. As she embarked on her college journey, I felt a mix of pride and emptiness. Though I had managed to provide for her education and housing, the absence of her daily presence at home left a void. We maintained close contact through phone calls, and during the initial months of her independence, our bond deepened. Her newfound affection and connection were a source of comfort, and I cherished our evolving relationship. Despite the challenges, my daughter graduated from college without financial setbacks, fulfilling a dream we had worked hard to achieve. Anticipating that we could live together again, I was surprised when she secured a job at a defense corporation and chose to live independently. To support her, I took a bank loan and contributed to the down payment for a condo near her workplace. While I aged and embraced a more unassuming appearance, my daughter thrived as a fashionable career woman. Witnessing her success brought immense happiness, reinforcing the idea that my sacrifices had borne fruit. I found contentment in her achievements, understanding the sentiment of people who say they forget hunger in moments of joy. Despite the financial support throughout her college years, the prospect of her wedding became a new financial responsibility. People questioned why I continued to struggle when my daughter was capable of self-sufficiency. However, I was determined to contribute to her wedding expenses to prevent any condescension from her future in-laws. The belief that sacrificing for her happiness would bring joy to both of us fueled my resilience. On the other hand, as my daughter dated, I noticed a growing distance between us. Initially hurt, I recognized that her adult life and relationships rightfully took precedence. I patiently waited for her to mature and open up to me, understanding that priorities shift during this phase of life. However, on her 27th birthday, I looked forward to celebrating with her. Yet she made it clear that she had plans with someone named Michael and dismissed any preparations. While she may have intended to convey that I needn't go to any trouble, I couldn't help but feel hurt. It was her birthday, a day that held immense significance for me as the day she was born, and her apparent indifference stung deeply. It was challenging to comprehend why my daughter considered spending money on her birthday a waste, given the tight budget. Despite her intelligence, her understanding of her own mother seemed distant. Despite my hurt feelings, I understood she was my only daughter, and I wanted to see her briefly on her birthday, even if it meant taking a day off work. On that day, I meticulously paid attention to my appearance before going to her workplace. However, what awaited me was an unexpected and emotionally charged encounter in the company lobby. I saw my ex-husband with his mistress, individuals I never wished to see again. Doubting how he found out and came there, I frantically called my daughter, only to be abruptly hung up on as she claimed to be busy with a meeting. Feeling dumbfounded, I turned around, only to hear my daughter happily calling her dad and embracing him with a bright smile. Her boyfriend seemed familiar with my ex-husband and his wife, adding to my fury. In that moment, I felt betrayed, as if the whole world conspired against me. Drained of meaning, I hastily left the scene. Reflecting on that day, I felt the desire to confront my daughter and ex-husband, but an overwhelming urge to escape prevailed. Despite my inner turmoil, I couldn't muster the courage to call my daughter. Unexpectedly, my daughter showed up at home one day, announcing her decision to get married and handing me an invitation card. The surprise turned into shock when I saw the names on the card. Although she was my daughter, I felt an intense urge to throw her out of the house. I questioned how she, my own daughter, could present such an invitation. I confronted her, expressing my hurt at being treated like a guest at her wedding, emphasizing my role as her mother. In response, my daughter apologized, stating she felt she had no choice. Despite her desire to marry Michael, she faced scrutiny from his parents over every detail about her. The situation left me grappling with complex emotions, torn between hurt and the desire to understand my daughter's perspective on her life-changing decision. The revelation from my daughter about her concerns regarding my divorced past and the challenges of being a single mother struck me deeply. She explained that revealing this truth could jeopardize her chances of marrying her boyfriend, as her potential in-laws might disapprove. In the face of this revelation, I couldn't help but express my frustration, reminding her of the sacrifices and struggles I endured to raise her, work at a restaurant, and fund her education. My daughter's response. However, her response stunned me. She dismissed the past, stating that her father and his new partner, the woman who played a role in breaking our family, had already met with her future in-laws. In her perspective, the present was what mattered most, and she prioritized her desire for a comfortable life over the difficulties we faced before. Feeling hurt and regretful, I spoke harshly to her for the first time in my life, expressing my disappointment in her attitude. In turn, she suggested that if I wanted to drop her from my life, I should repay her for the money I spent raising her. This exchange led to a heated argument, and she left my house in anger, proclaiming that we were now strangers. Devastated by the turn of events, I questioned the purpose of saving money for her wedding and felt a deep sadness when I looked at the wedding invitation she had left behind, with a different name printed where mine should have been. 3 years later, I received news that my father, who had been living independently to avoid burdening me, had fallen ill. Sadly, I learned about his condition only after his passing. The realization of being a poor daughter to him hit me hard. A few months later, I inherited a small condo where he had lived, a bittersweet reminder of the family ties and struggles that shaped my life. Upon realizing that I had money saved from my daughter's wedding in the savings account, I decided it was time to live for myself, even if it seemed somewhat late in life. I pondered the idea that in today's world, trusting only one child and sacrificing for them might not be the most fulfilling path. It was a realization that I should prioritize my own desires and needs before it became too late for me to enjoy life. As I contemplated this shift in perspective, a real estate broker and close friend from the restaurant where I worked suggested that I consider what I truly wanted to do. Despite societal expectations for women to sacrifice, I felt the desire to break free from that mold and live for myself. I harbored a feeling of regret and sorrow for the sacrifices I made over the years, and I yearned to pursue personal fulfillment. Inspired by my friend, I embarked on studying the real estate business and even delved into auction biddings. With some savings and money from selling my late father's condo, I seized the opportunity to take on a new challenge. In the surprising turn of events, I became a building owner overnight, residing in a prime location. 6 months later, after returning from a mountain climbing adventure, I found myself on the top floor of my building, now transformed into my home. Unexpectedly, someone knocked on my door, and I debated whether to pretend not to be home due to fatigue. However, curiosity prevailed, and I opened the door to find my pregnant daughter with a chubby-cheeked toddler in her arms. Tearful and distressed, she explained that she had been deceived by her husband, who turned violent and had affairs. Faced with impending childbirth and raising her young daughter, she sought refuge with me, despite my initial shock and the lingering hurt from our previous arguments. I couldn't turn my back on my daughter in need. She revealed that she had heard about my newfound success in real estate and wanted assistance. Despite the painful history between us, she pleaded for help, pointing out that she had a share in the money I had acquired from my wedding savings and inheritance. Caught between anger and compassion, I couldn't deny my daughter's plea for help. Despite her past actions, I recognized the vulnerability in her situation and knew that as a mother, I couldn't turn her away. The complexities of our relationship resurfaced, prompting me to grapple with the tangled emotions of love, disappointment, and the inevitability of family ties. I confronted her, saying, "I was the one who saved money for your education and your wedding, but you told me to get out of your life. Do I need to give you money now?" I only said that, but I didn't get any money back from you. It seems that in front of money, there is no use for the bond between a parent and a child. Now that you have money, you don't need a daughter, right? No matter what, I am still your daughter, so I have a right to your money too. I was once very proud of you, thinking that it was because of me that you were able to attend Harvard. But now I see that it was all in vain. I guess I was too busy making a living that I couldn't teach you to be a decent human being. I raised you as someone who is so selfish and can only think of yourself. I don't plan to give you one penny, so you can either go back to your husband or your wonderful father. You are too mean. Could you abandon your own daughter? Do you think other people would care for me at all? That wife already ran off with the money, and he has disappeared trying to look for her. If you abandon me, I'll become an orphan. Now I have a child and I'm pregnant, so how could you be so mean to me? Would you be happy if I died like that? When she screamed at me, I couldn't put up with her any longer, so I took out all the money I had in my wallet and threw it at her. Since you are acting so pathetic, I'll give you that. However, never come back to my house because I won't let you in. There's something that I learned in the meantime, just that your life is important. Now my life is important. You cannot put me in and out of your life at your whim. I coldly let my daughter and her child out of my house. Of course, I would not feel good about it since she was my daughter after all. However, I couldn't accept her because she still was as selfish as before, and I couldn't bury the past. However, I felt sorry for my little granddaughter, who was innocent and got kicked out together with her mom. After that, my daughter was too proud and never came to see me again. To be honest, I knew that she was such a daughter. So, has she repented for her past acts and begged me for forgiveness out of a quest? Pretending I was reluctant, but would have found ways to punish her wayward husband. But I was so disappointed that if she erased me from her life to marry her husband, she should have lived happily. Why did my husband and my daughter turn out that way, even though I lived a hard life? Now I see that the only person who is living a life the way I want to is only me alone. Thus, if anyone is living a life like I did on behalf of others, I want to say this one thing for sure. No matter how strong your relationship is with another person, be sure to take care of your life first. Even if everyone in this world betrays you, you will not betray yourself. In the end, happiness is not what you do for others, but what you do for yourself. I want to give that message through my story here. Even though it may seem like a life that's only felt half, I plan to try to fill that remaining half from now on for complete happiness. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope all goes well for you today, and good fortune will be with you. Please cheer for me and write your comments of wisdom in the comment section. Pressing like and subscribing is a big help to me. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Hello, I am a single woman in my 60s. Since childhood, I held on to the belief in a reciprocal philosophy, thinking that my hard work and dedication would be met with equal effort in return. This mindset extended to my relationships, where I believed treating others kindly would result in receiving kindness in return. Even after marriage, I continued to hold this belief, assuming that by being considerate to my husband, he would reciprocate. In today's world, women aren't expected to sacrifice as much. But during my era, societal expectations were different. I willingly made sacrifices for my husband and children, confident that my efforts would contribute to future happiness. However, my marriage and family life didn't unfold as expected. Despite my early mornings and diligent work for the family, complaints and mistakes overshadowed appreciation. At that time, no one mandated that I live this way. I was an ordinary person who married a coworker 4 years my senior due to societal expectations. Despite the societal norms for married women to quit their jobs, I became a full-time housewife after giving birth to my daughter. I had no regrets. I believed it was a natural course of action for family life. Though my life wasn't glamorous like TV dramas, it felt easy and stable. Around my daughter's 9th grade, tragedy struck when my mother passed away suddenly from a heart attack. While mourning her loss, I discovered my husband's affair. In the midst of my grief, he found joy elsewhere, becoming uncaring and eventually demanding a divorce. Despite my determination to avoid divorce, my husband's behavior became unbearable. Divorce wasn't as socially acceptable back then, and despite an irresponsible and unkind husband, I resisted the idea. Looking back, I realized my naivety, but more was at stake. My daughter, witnessing the turmoil, felt the impact. Despite my refusal to divorce, I found myself in a deeply miserable situation. During a heated argument about our impending divorce, my father unexpectedly visited. Witnessing the distress in our relationship, he offered me a place to live and encouraged me to leave my husband, taking my daughter with me. Having recently lost his wife and observed his daughter in an unhappy marriage, my father convinced me that persisting in such a difficult situation was futile. Feeling the weight of his concern, I yielded to my husband's request for a divorce. In return, my husband provided me with $3,000 in cash. With my father's support, I secured a 2-bedroom townhouse to live in with my daughter, starting anew. I anticipated the need to work hard to support my daughter, fearing judgment from society for being a divorced woman with a daughter. This concern was particularly heightened as my daughter entered adolescence. During this challenging period, my daughter expressed typical desires of her age, lamenting the perceived consequences of her parents' divorce. Despite the emotional hurt, I knew I couldn't dwell on them forever, determined to provide for my daughter. I embarked on the journey of seeking stable employment. However, being an older divorced woman with a child made securing a job challenging. Undeterred, I took on multiple part-time and nighttime jobs, even engaging in freelance work at home whenever possible. As time passed, my daughter advanced to her senior year of high school. Despite financial constraints, she excelled academically, finding her own way to thrive. Motivated by my desire to ensure her future, I secured a job at a 24-hour restaurant, working 12-hour shifts. 2/3 of my earnings were diligently saved for her college tuition. Despite facing judgment and gossip, especially from some married men who viewed me as an easy target, I persevered for the sake of my daughter. The sacrifices were numerous, but my goal was to provide her with opportunities I never had. As she approached adulthood, I hoped she would understand the struggles I faced in raising her and making a living. Reflecting on these challenges, I realized that having a daughter made my situation both more arduous and meaningful. She became my anchor, giving me the strength to endure and persevere through life's challenges. I held on to the belief that, in the future, my grown daughter and I would share stories about the hardships we faced and take pride in our resilience. A year later, my daughter's outstanding performance in the SAT exams earned her admission to Harvard University, a moment of immense joy that made all the previous struggles worthwhile. As she embarked on her college journey, I felt a mix of pride and emptiness. Though I had managed to provide for her education and housing, the absence of her daily presence at home left a void. We maintained close contact through phone calls, and during the initial months of her independence, our bond deepened. Her newfound affection and connection were a source of comfort, and I cherished our evolving relationship. Despite the challenges, my daughter graduated from college without financial setbacks, fulfilling a dream we had worked hard to achieve. Anticipating that we could live together again, I was surprised when she secured a job at a defense corporation and chose to live independently. To support her, I took a bank loan and contributed to the down payment for a condo near her workplace. While I aged and embraced a more unassuming appearance, my daughter thrived as a fashionable career woman. Witnessing her success brought immense happiness, reinforcing the idea that my sacrifices had borne fruit. I found contentment in her achievements, understanding the sentiment of people who say they forget hunger in moments of joy. Despite the financial support throughout her college years, the prospect of her wedding became a new financial responsibility. People questioned why I continued to struggle when my daughter was capable of self-sufficiency. However, I was determined to contribute to her wedding expenses to prevent any condescension from her future in-laws. The belief that sacrificing for her happiness would bring joy to both of us fueled my resilience. On the other hand, as my daughter dated, I noticed a growing distance between us. Initially hurt, I recognized that her adult life and relationships rightfully took precedence. I patiently waited for her to mature and open up to me, understanding that priorities shift during this phase of life. However, on her 27th birthday, I looked forward to celebrating with her. Yet she made it clear that she had plans with someone named Michael and dismissed any preparations. While she may have intended to convey that I needn't go to any trouble, I couldn't help but feel hurt. It was her birthday, a day that held immense significance for me as the day she was born, and her apparent indifference stung deeply. It was challenging to comprehend why my daughter considered spending money on her birthday a waste, given the tight budget. Despite her intelligence, her understanding of her own mother seemed distant. Despite my hurt feelings, I understood she was my only daughter, and I wanted to see her briefly on her birthday, even if it meant taking a day off work. On that day, I meticulously paid attention to my appearance before going to her workplace. However, what awaited me was an unexpected and emotionally charged encounter in the company lobby. I saw my ex-husband with his mistress, individuals I never wished to see again. Doubting how he found out and came there, I frantically called my daughter, only to be abruptly hung up on as she claimed to be busy with a meeting. Feeling dumbfounded, I turned around, only to hear my daughter happily calling her dad and embracing him with a bright smile. Her boyfriend seemed familiar with my ex-husband and his wife, adding to my fury. In that moment, I felt betrayed, as if the whole world conspired against me. Drained of meaning, I hastily left the scene. Reflecting on that day, I felt the desire to confront my daughter and ex-husband, but an overwhelming urge to escape prevailed. Despite my inner turmoil, I couldn't muster the courage to call my daughter. Unexpectedly, my daughter showed up at home one day, announcing her decision to get married and handing me an invitation card. The surprise turned into shock when I saw the names on the card. Although she was my daughter, I felt an intense urge to throw her out of the house. I questioned how she, my own daughter, could present such an invitation. I confronted her, expressing my hurt at being treated like a guest at her wedding, emphasizing my role as her mother. In response, my daughter apologized, stating she felt she had no choice. Despite her desire to marry Michael, she faced scrutiny from his parents over every detail about her. The situation left me grappling with complex emotions, torn between hurt and the desire to understand my daughter's perspective on her life-changing decision. The revelation from my daughter about her concerns regarding my divorced past and the challenges of being a single mother struck me deeply. She explained that revealing this truth could jeopardize her chances of marrying her boyfriend, as her potential in-laws might disapprove. In the face of this revelation, I couldn't help but express my frustration, reminding her of the sacrifices and struggles I endured to raise her, work at a restaurant, and fund her education. My daughter's response. However, her response stunned me. She dismissed the past, stating that her father and his new partner, the woman who played a role in breaking our family, had already met with her future in-laws. In her perspective, the present was what mattered most, and she prioritized her desire for a comfortable life over the difficulties we faced before. Feeling hurt and regretful, I spoke harshly to her for the first time in my life, expressing my disappointment in her attitude. In turn, she suggested that if I wanted to drop her from my life, I should repay her for the money I spent raising her. This exchange led to a heated argument, and she left my house in anger, proclaiming that we were now strangers. Devastated by the turn of events, I questioned the purpose of saving money for her wedding and felt a deep sadness when I looked at the wedding invitation she had left behind, with a different name printed where mine should have been. 3 years later, I received news that my father, who had been living independently to avoid burdening me, had fallen ill. Sadly, I learned about his condition only after his passing. The realization of being a poor daughter to him hit me hard. A few months later, I inherited a small condo where he had lived, a bittersweet reminder of the family ties and struggles that shaped my life. Upon realizing that I had money saved from my daughter's wedding in the savings account, I decided it was time to live for myself, even if it seemed somewhat late in life. I pondered the idea that in today's world, trusting only one child and sacrificing for them might not be the most fulfilling path. It was a realization that I should prioritize my own desires and needs before it became too late for me to enjoy life. As I contemplated this shift in perspective, a real estate broker and close friend from the restaurant where I worked, suggested that I consider what I truly wanted to do. Despite societal expectations for women to sacrifice, I felt the desire to break free from that mold and live for myself. I harbored a feeling of regret and sorrow for the sacrifices I made over the years, and I yearned to pursue personal fulfillment. Inspired by my friend, I embarked on studying the real estate business and even delved into auction biddings. With some savings and money from selling my late father's condo, I seized the opportunity to take on a new challenge. In the surprising turn of events, I became a building owner overnight, residing in a prime location. 6 months later, after returning from a mountain climbing adventure, I found myself on the top floor of my building, now transformed into my home. Unexpectedly, someone knocked on my door, and I debated whether to pretend not to be home due to fatigue. However, curiosity prevailed, and I opened the door to find my pregnant daughter with a chubby-cheeked toddler in her arms. Tearful and distressed, she explained that she had been deceived by her husband, who turned violent and had affairs. Faced with impending childbirth and raising her young daughter, she sought refuge with me, despite my initial shock and the lingering hurt from our previous arguments. I couldn't turn my back on my daughter in need. She revealed that she had heard about my newfound success in real estate and wanted assistance. Despite the painful history between us, she pleaded for help, pointing out that she had a share in the money I had acquired from my wedding savings and inheritance. Caught between anger and compassion, I couldn't deny my daughter's plea for help. Despite her past actions, I recognized the vulnerability in her situation and knew that as a mother, I couldn't turn her away. The complexities of our relationship resurfaced, prompting me to grapple with the tangled emotions of love, disappointment, and the inevitability of family ties. I confronted her, saying, "I was the one who saved money for your education and your wedding, but you told me to get out of your life. Do I need to give you money now?" I only said that, but I didn't get any money back from you. It seems that in front of money, there is no use for the bond between a parent and a child. Now that you have money, you don't need a daughter, right? No matter what, I am still your daughter, so I have a right to your money too. I was once very proud of you, thinking that it was because of me that you were able to attend Harvard. But now I see that it was all in vain. I guess I was too busy making a living that I couldn't teach you to be a decent human being. I raised you as someone who is so selfish and can only think of yourself. I don't plan to give you one penny, so you can either go back to your husband or your wonderful father. You are too mean. Could you abandon your own daughter? Do you think other people would care for me at all? That wife already ran off with the money, and he has disappeared trying to look for her. If you abandon me, I'll become an orphan. Now I have a child and I'm pregnant, so how could you be so mean to me? Would you be happy if I died like that? When she screamed at me, I couldn't put up with her any longer, so I took out all the money I had in my wallet and threw it at her. Since you are acting so pathetic, I'll give you that. However, never come back to my house because I won't let you in. There's something that I learned in the meantime, just that your life is important. Now my life is important. You cannot put me in and out of your life at your whim. I coldly let my daughter and her child out of my house. Of course, I would not feel good about it since she was my daughter after all. However, I couldn't accept her because she still was as selfish as before, and I couldn't bury the past. However, I felt sorry for my little granddaughter, who was innocent and got kicked out together with her mom. After that, my daughter was too proud and never came to see me again. To be honest, I knew that she was such a daughter. So, has she repented for her past acts and begged me for forgiveness out of a quest, pretending I was reluctant, but would have found ways to punish her wayward husband. But I was so disappointed that if she erased me from her life to marry her husband, she should have lived happily. Why did my husband and my daughter turn out that way, even though I lived a hard life? Now I see that the only person who is living a life the way I want to is only me alone. Thus, if anyone is living a life like I did on behalf of others, I want to say this one thing for sure. No matter how strong your relationship is with another person, be sure to take care of your life first. Even if everyone in this world betrays you, you will not betray yourself. In the end, happiness is not what you do for others, but what you do for yourself. I want to give that message through my story here. Even though it may seem like a life that's only felt half, I plan to try to fill that remaining half from now on for complete happiness. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope all goes well for you today, and good fortune will be with you. Please cheer for me and write your comments of wisdom in the comment section. Pressing like and subscribing is a big help to me. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Hello, everyone. My name is Betty, and I'd like to share a personal story with you. My mother-in-law, Madison, wasn't always the superficial and self-centered person she appears to be today. According to my husband, Edward, her transformation occurred later in life. Edward grew up in humble circumstances. His world changed drastically when he lost his father at the age of 5, leaving Madison to become the sole provider. Despite the challenges, she rose to the occasion, ensuring they had a stable, albeit modest, life. This resilience makes her current behavior even more striking. Through sheer determination and brilliance, Edward earned a full scholarship to medical school and eventually became a respected doctor. Despite his professional success, he remains grounded, a trait I deeply admire. However, Madison's lifestyle shifted dramatically after Edward's career took off. She embraced luxury, a far cry from the humble life they once shared. To give some context about myself, I'm not currently employed, though I will explain why later. However, this does not mean I am financially unstable or reliant on others. Unfortunately, my first meeting with Madison got off to a rocky start due to her harsh misjudgment of my appearance and demeanor. When we met, her reaction was anything but welcoming. "Edward, is this the girl you've been excited about?" she questioned, scrutinizing me. "She looks so ordinary and unremarkable. Why her? Does she even work?" In that moment, Madison unfairly branded me as a potential gold digger, assuming I had ulterior motives for being with Edward. Her comments cut deeply, creating a tense dynamic from the start. Despite Edward's efforts to defend me, the encounter escalated into a heated argument. Eventually, we left, and during the drive home, Edward apologized for his mother's behavior. He admitted she had overstepped her boundaries and tried to reassure me. "She's changed," Edward explained. "She's not the person she used to be. Please don't take her words to heart." Although his words were comforting, the thought of maintaining a relationship with Madison felt daunting. However, as Edward's only remaining parent, I knew cutting ties completely wasn't a practical solution. "I'm not asking you to be friends with her," Edward said gently, "but could you try to be civil?" Reluctantly, I agreed to be respectful, though I doubted Madison would return the favor. "Don't worry, Betty," he reassured me. "If she steps out of line again, we'll reassess how we handle things. I love my mom, but I love you too, and I won't let her mistreat you." Even with Edward's support, I remained uneasy about my relationship with Madison. 4 years later, Edward and I got married in a simple courthouse ceremony, largely due to financial constraints. Edward was still supporting Madison, sending her a significant portion of his income each month for so-called emergencies. This practice continued after our marriage, putting a strain on our own finances. I never interfered with Edward's decision to support his mother, believing it was his right and responsibility. However, Madison's behavior became increasingly problematic. She often spoke negatively about me to her friends, spreading rumors that painted me as a gold digger. At first, I tried to ignore the slander, but it began to damage my reputation. Despite Edward's best efforts to mediate, Madison remained cold and distrustful. She was convinced I wasn't a suitable match for her son and treated me with disdain and suspicion. The ongoing tension made me question how long we could sustain this fragile family dynamic. Then, one day, Edward shared unexpected news. Madison wanted to invite me to a small gathering she was planning. Given her clear dislike for me, I was skeptical of her sudden change of heart. Edward, however, reassured me. "She wants to make amends," he said confidently. "She's trying to turn over a new leaf." Although I harbored doubts about Madison's intentions, I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. Edward was hopeful this could be a step toward repairing our strained relationship, and I wanted to approach the situation with an open mind. As the party date approached, I waited for more details from Madison with a mixture of eagerness and apprehension. Then the next day, Madison sent me a text. Assuming she was confirming the invitation, I opened it with cautious optimism. Her message began with a casual mention of the venue, a renowned 5-star hotel that was the talk of the town. She described the glamorous event she was hosting for 21 guests, proudly detailing how fabulous it would be. Feeling uncertain, I asked if I was still invited, based on what Edward had told me. Madison's response left me stunned. With an air of arrogance, she clarified that I was not invited. She emphasized the exclusivity of the event, the prestige of her guests, and her family's supposed wealth, making it clear that I wasn't part of her plans. I was humiliated and confused. Edward had been so sure she was extending an olive branch, yet here I was, excluded and belittled. Though hurt, I knew I had to maintain my composure. I calmly responded to Madison, explaining the misunderstanding, but her reply was patronizing. She suggested I couldn't possibly comprehend the complexities of organizing an event of such high caliber. Faced with her disdain, I chose to preserve my dignity, acknowledging her message without engaging further. After Madison's dismissive reply, I made it clear I had no interest in attending the gathering where I wasn't welcome. Rather than soften her tone, Madison doubled down, flaunting her supposed status and exclusivity. Though I felt a strong urge to respond in anger, I decided against it. Instead, I chose not to share the upsetting exchange with Edward and waited for the day of the party to pass. On the day of the event, Madison, seemingly oblivious to the emotional toll her words had caused, sent me a photo of herself and her friends dressed in lavish designer outfits. She later posted boastful updates on social media, highlighting the elegance of their evening. I ignored it all, focusing on my work and patiently waiting to see how things would unfold. About 2 hours later, I received an unexpected call from my father, which brought a surprising twist to the story. Here's something I hadn't shared widely. My father owns the very hotel where Madison was hosting her party, a fact she was unaware of. 4 years ago, I inherited a substantial sum from my grandfather, which I invested in my father's business. As a result, I now receive a share of the profits from the hotel and other family-owned enterprises. Despite my comfortable financial situation, I've always preferred to maintain a low profile, which is why Madison had no idea about my connection to the venue. My father's call revealed another layer of irony. Madison and her friends, oblivious to the high costs associated with such a luxurious venue, had racked up a bill of $4,000. After enjoying their extravagant evening, they requested a 60% discount, claiming they were short on cash. My father, aware of the situation and having heard complaints from staff about Madison's group being rude and entitled, sought my advice on how to handle it. As he described the scenario, I couldn't help but reflect on the irony. Madison, who had used the party to flaunt her supposed superiority, couldn't afford the event she had so proudly hosted. I shared my frustrations with my father, recounting how Madison had demeaned me while unknowingly hosting her event at my family's property. The situation felt like an unexpected poetic form of retribution for her earlier behavior. As my father and I discussed Madison's ostentatious display and the burdens she and her guests had placed on the staff, he fully grasped the irony of the moment. Together, we decided how to address the issue in a way that would both uphold the hotel's policies and serve as a quiet, meaningful lesson for Madison. Half-jokingly, I suggested to my dad that Madison and her entourage could make amends by washing dishes and cleaning the restaurant floors, considering their disrespectful behavior toward the staff. While the idea carried a hint of poetic justice, it also presented an opportunity to teach a lesson in humility and respect. My dad, amused by the suggestion, playfully added that if Madison escalated the matter, involving the authorities was always an option, though we hoped it wouldn't come to that. He chuckled at my suggestion, giving it an enthusiastic endorsement, and even joked about documenting the moment with photos. What started as a fan comment soon turned into reality. About an hour later, my dad sent me pictures of Madison and her friends, visibly humbled, washing dishes and mopping the restaurant floors. When Madison realized my dad was the owner of the hotel, her attitude initially shifted to one of relief, assuming her connection to him would get her out of the predicament. However, to her shock, my dad insisted she and her guests take responsibility for their actions. Temporarily dumbfounded, Madison protested, but my dad reminded her firmly that since she didn't consider me family, she couldn't expect familial courtesies either. The irony of the situation was undeniable. While part of me regretted not witnessing the scene in person, the photos were proof enough of the day's unexpected turn. Later that evening, Edward came home visibly unsettled. It was clear Madison had reached out to him, likely providing a skewed version of the events. He approached me with concern, asking about the claim that his mother had been forced to clean at the restaurant. I knew I needed to tread carefully, balancing my desire for vindication with the importance of preserving my relationship with Edward. Calmly, I explained the situation in full detail, emphasizing that what had happened was a natural consequence of Madison's behavior. I outlined how Madison had come to her family-owned hotel, racked up a $4,000 bill, claimed she could only pay $2,000, and harassed the staff throughout the event. Her ostentatious party had turned into an absolute nightmare for everyone involved, and my dad's actions were entirely justified. Edward, clearly stunned, asked about the details of the gathering, including the guests and what they had ordered. I explained that, contrary to what Madison had told him, she hadn't brought just 5 people. She had brought 21 guests who had indulged in the most expensive items on the menu. Edward was speechless. Madison had not only misled him about the guest list, but she had also lied about inviting me, claiming I had declined. The truth left him grappling with a mix of frustration and disbelief as the dynamics of the situation became clearer to him. I corrected Edward by showing him the text messages from Madison, which clearly demonstrated I was never genuinely invited to her event. At his request, I also provided the restaurant bills and shared the full text exchanges. To substantiate the costs further, my father sent him receipts, and I showed Edward photos of Madison's lavish party. As Edward reviewed the evidence, his initial disbelief turned to anger. Without hesitation, he called Madison to confront her about the glaring discrepancies in her story. Madison attempted to downplay the situation, claiming she had only mentioned being short on cash and accusing me of twisting the story to sabotage her. Edward wasn't buying it. He pointed out the inconsistencies between her words and the evidence and reminded her of the insult she had thrown my way, saying I wasn't classy enough to attend her event. Madison tried to dismiss her remark as a harmless joke, but Edward remained unconvinced. He pressed her on her irresponsible spending, especially since it was coming out of his pocket, and criticized her for insulting his wife while wasting money on her friends. Madison scrambled to justify her actions, but Edward's profound disappointment was unmistakable. "Mom," he said firmly, "I made a mistake by always giving you money whenever you needed it. But guess what? That ends now." Desperate, Madison protested. "Edward, you've been so supportive all this time. You can't just stop now. It was just a one-time mistake. Why are you overreacting?" "No, Mom," Edward retorted, his voice steady with resolve. "This isn't just a one-time mistake. If you can't even consider my wife as family, then I don't want anything to do with you. I always hoped you'd change your attitude, but you haven't. I'm not going to keep funding your lifestyle while you insult my wife and call her classless. This ends now." Edward didn't wait for a response. He hung up, blocked her number, and turned to me, his demeanor softening. He apologized profusely for ducking me initially and for not understanding the full extent of the situation sooner. I forgave him, appreciating that he had stood up for me when it mattered most. We had a serious discussion about Madison and decided that, for now, it was best to distance ourselves from her. Edward, though wealthy, remained humble and found his mother's behavior unacceptable. I agreed wholeheartedly, feeling both validated and relieved by his unwavering support. Together, we resolved to remove the negativity she brought into our lives. A few days later, the gravity of her actions began to dawn on Madison. Realizing she might have irreparably harmed her relationship with Edward, she panicked. However, the decision had been made. For us, it marked a new beginning, free from the strain and tension her presence had caused. With Edward ceasing financial support, Madison's lifestyle changed drastically. Accustomed to a high-end existence funded largely by Edward's generosity, she suddenly struggled to maintain her standard of living. Despite having a job, her earnings were insufficient to cover the opulent expenses she was used to. She eventually had to terminate her lease on her condo and move into a modest one-bedroom apartment, where budgeting for basic necessities became her new reality. Madison frequently emailed us about her financial difficulties, downplaying her past behavior and accusing us of overreacting. It was clear she wasn't ready to fully acknowledge her role in the estrangement. Meanwhile, Edward redirected his financial support toward my father's business, investing in the expansion of his hotel and restaurant ventures. We had aspirations to grow the business into larger cities, though those plans are still in the early stages. Amid these changes, life brought us unexpected joy. I discovered I was pregnant. Edward and I are thrilled and have been busy preparing for our new arrival. With a baby on the way, I'm relieved that our child will be shielded from the negativity Madison once brought into our lives. Should Madison ever wish to be part of our child's life, I am determined to ensure she does not impart any harmful influences. For now, we are focused on welcoming our child into a loving and stable environment, free from shallow or disruptive behavior. We appreciate any well wishes as we embark on this exciting journey of parenthood, determined to provide the best for our child.